Thank you for your attendance. Or something. I'm sorry. I really need to see the movie more than once to get the voice down. I will work on it and perfect it. And that's about enough of this music. Man, this is a very spittle. There must have been a lot of windscreens and like assistants with little handkerchiefs to like blot Skarsgård's mouth after he's doing that. He did that voice himself. And hello, Grey Waste Tim, Victorian gentleman. Look at you. Look at you.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing the vibes. We must be here to talk about vampires today. Is that the case?
Yes, we are. I am Count Tim of the Grey Waste, and I bid you welcome to the vampire stream.
I unfortunately had to shave my mustache. Yeah, I can't do that. Anyway, so guys, I'm not doing those either. That's all. Eyes of fire. Dracula has fiery eyes. There you go. Hey, now we're all comfortable. I don't want to put anybody off. So look, I just want to tell you straight out what we're going to do today. We're going to do a lot of things. We are going to talk about vampires in A Song of Ice and Fire, which means we're going to cover all the vampire stories. And honestly, we could do 3 hours just talking about Dracula, Bram Stoker, and other versions, but mainly Bram Stoker. And then, of course, Nosferatu, the old and a little bit of the new version. And then George's own vampire. Oh, Tim, you're not going to keep the hat on?
I actually got more props for later.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a fine-looking chapeau. We're also going to talk about George's vampire story, Fever Dream, which he describes as Mark Twain meets Bram Stoker. And then we will also talk about Vlad the Impaler and general vampire themes and how you kill them and all that good stuff. And, of course, we will, interspersed with all that, be tying into all the vampires in A Song of Ice and Fire, because there's a damn lot of them. We've got the White Walkers, the Boltons, all the Targaryens and Valerians, little Melisandre, the weirwood trees themselves. There's a lot of vampires in the story, and blood magic principles and themes from the vampire stories that have carried over even to the Nissa Nissa Azor High legend. And we're going to talk about the poet Byron, Lord Byron, the poet, who George quotes extensively in Fever Dream, and whom we discovered wrote a poem called Darkness, which is absolutely the inspiration for Old Nan's story about the long night. So yeah, we've got a few things on tap for you. How long will the stream go? How many pages of notes did Tim make? You'll just have to find out. But
I think it's about 18.
18 hours, Tim. I don't have that much time.
18 pages, I think it is.
Oh, that's much more comfortable. Okay, so basically, hopefully you've seen Nosferatu, one of the versions, or you've read Bram Stoker, or seen a version of Bram Stoker. Fever Dream, is George's vampire story. It's really good. I just finished it like yesterday, so it's all fresh in my mind. And it is incredible. I forgot how much fun it is, Tim, to read a George Martin story where you don't know what's going to happen next. It's been, a minute since that, but it's very exciting. And so we're going to talk about that. And so if you haven't done Fever Dream, this will spoil some of that, but not so much that you won't still enjoy reading the book. It's very complicated, and whatever we say today will probably end up being sort of jumbled in your mind by the time you read the story. So I wouldn't be afraid to watch this, even if you haven't done Fever Dream. We will make you want to read it, though, by talking about it. So it is what it is. It's just really friggin' interesting to see George's commentary on the vampire stories addressed so specifically, because usually we're talking about his commentary on the references he's using in A Song of Ice and Fire. Okay, so he's quoting Tolkien and paralleling Tolkien, but then, adding his own commentary or whatever. The thing about Fever Dream is it's very openly just him doing his version of vampires and giving his commentary on the genre. So, wow, where do you want to start, Tim? Vampirism 101, I guess, right? Just general cult beliefs about
knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the great things we've talked about before, myth that runs through all different cultures. We've talked about how there's a creation myth and a flood myth, and one of the interesting things is that every culture, from Europe to African to Asian to native cultures, they all have some kind of story of the vampire or some kind of Walking Dead myth. Tales of demons or spirits, hungry dead, precursors to vampires, zombies. They can date back all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, and this taps into mankind's primal fear of what we would now call the Uncanny Valley, which is something that looks human but is not quite human. And that makes us like think like, what the hell was it in the days of ancient man that ingrained such that fear into us that it's still like a genetic code? We've said possibly Neanderthals. Maybe if you're more of a tinfoil, you might say aliens, but definitely something spooky out in the dark that scared primitive man so much that we still hold that fear thousands and thousands of years later.
So one thing that's interesting, Tim, is that some of the very oldest religious beliefs that we have discovered are skull cults. All over the world, like Catalhoyuk and Göbekli Tepe, the sort of civilization that seems to be behind all those things in Turkey and the northern Fertile Crescent. Definitely skull cult stuff going on. We don't really know what they believe. They don't necessarily think, blood drinking, but maybe. Definitely a lot of cannibalism in the ancient world. Whenever they find skull caps turned into cups, they generally think that's cannibalism. But there's a lot of people that just collect skulls, so that could be veneration of ancestors. We don't know, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to imagine the skulls and their dark holes of eyes somehow staring back at you and coming back to life. And then you think of some of the oldest mythology and most universal mythology also, Tim, would be cycle of the seasons mythology. And it's kind of natural to think about, things that are supposed to be dead, maybe inverting that, like unlife, becomes a powerful metaphor, as we'll talk about today too. But yeah, could you know anything more about the Mesopotamian Walking Dead?
Yeah, those start as tales of hungry ghosts, vengeful spirits that just refuse to move on, and those stories of the vengeful spirit of the hungry ghost become our precursor to the vampire. Usually, the hungry ghost is something that would feed on one's life essence, their soul, and then as time goes on and we get more influences, we get to the stories of monsters that feast on flesh and then feast on blood, especially when we get to the idea of, which we're going to talk about later, blood as the currency of life and how that comes in, especially when Christianity starts to become more prominent in a lot of these regions.
You just mentioned the Uncanny Valley. Would you explain that real quick for people who might not have heard that?
Yeah, so the Uncanny Valley, right now in modern day, we would think about it in terms of robotics, trying to create a robot that looks human. But what they find is that a lot of the reasons why a lot of these robotics that are meant to look human aren't popular is because of the eerie feeling that they give, because it's something that's trying to mimic being a human but doesn't capture it. You can do same thing, like if you have like like if you're like me and you have a phobia of like porcelain dolls, it's the same aspect. It's something that looks human,
almost real, but not quite. Yeah, if it's more cartoonish, it's like safer because it's clearly not different or whatever. Yeah, I think I'm very sensitive to that. I don't like things that don't look right. Yeah, no, not quite, baby. This Visine is empty. I might need to run and go get some. I have some very dry, burny eyes right now, appropriately for the topic. But yeah, I might have to go do a quick run while I turn Tim loose on something here in a second. But let me not do that just yet. I just want to hang out because, we just started the stream. It's my channel. I'm supposed to be here. So Tim, the traits vary from region to region. And of course, werewolves and various kinds of undead are all kind of wrapped in together here. The vampire, as I learned by reading all these books, modern pop culture has reduced it down to the bat stuff and the blood drinking, but controlling the wolves is all part of it. So it's there's a lot of, and George talks about that in Fever Dream, how there's many different legends of, are similar, but they're all referring to the same thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, because you can have things like the Chinese hopping vampire, for example, but as we go on, especially into modern day, as the vampire became a fixture in storytelling, one thing that authors and writers and then later filmmakers tended to gravitate towards was the Eastern European interpretation of the vampire as the walking corpse, and that's why we'll get characters like Count Dracula, Count Orlok, who are coming out of Transylvania, coming out of present day Romania. And then, of course, we are going to talk about real life Wallachian Prince Vlad the Impaler.
And then, of course, like as we're alluding to, sometimes the vampires are more beautiful, and sometimes they are more corpse-like. Eggers, obviously, in the new one, did a very cool, more corpse-like Dracula, which was very, very disturbing. So, yeah, that was I prefer that version, but it works well as a metaphor either way, because obviously the main theme of vampirism is, drawing off from somebody else to make your own self stronger. It's the opposite of self-sacrifice. And we'll get into this more, but I made a video, Tim, called Azor Ahai the Bad Guy, trying to unpack that myth. And my whole spiel on the Azor Ahai myth is like, look at this guy. He's killing his wife. He's an act of blood magic, and he's breaking the moon in the process. He's defiling the natural order and the heavenly order. Is clearly a villain. And then we see, the Bloodstone Emperor story actually maps pretty well onto that, further revealing Azor Ahai as a villain, causing the Long Night, seizing power, the bad guy. But because he's doing a vampiric thing, literally drawing Nissa Nissa's life and soul and strength into his talisman, which then makes him a powerful warrior. Supposedly to fight the darkness, but, like I said, it's complicated. But then we have the Nissa Nissa side, Tim, the Christ-like self-sacrifice. She gives her life and her blood to save the world. And so George has written this complex myth that gives you the sort of both sides of the heroic and, ideal and the villain ideal in the story, which is why I always say George is a nihilist, and it's A Song of Ice and Fire isn't all about celebrating the triumph of evil and, nothing you do matters and all that stuff. He just likes the heroes to have to struggle against overwhelming odds to prove their heroism or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something we're going to get to when we talk the differences between Count Orlok and Count Dracula, as well as the differences between Ellen Hutter and Mina Harker, because we are looking at the Azor Ahai myth from both angles. Was Nissa Nissa a willing sacrifice, or was this outright murder? Is she the Ellen Hutter who sacrifices herself to rid the world of Count Orlok, or is she more like Mina Harker, who is forced into the situation by Count Dracula?
And more over time, Tim, I've come to say that George is probably meaning to present us with those two possibilities more than ever, maybe even revealing which it was. Like, he enjoys creating that, Hall of Mirrors or like two-sided parable. So, yeah, it can be read both ways, and that causes rumination. And then we can see with the main characters in the story, who are always got our main attention, we see all the different versions. We see Euron planning to, use Dany in some way, but we see Dany and Jon and Brienne and other people ready to do the Nissa Nissa thing and sacrifice themselves for other people. In fact, Brienne's moral compass is so strong that she says she has no choice. Even when there is no chance for her to win, she's got no choice but to lay her life down, because that's what her principle is, and she can't, do anything but live up to that principle. So we'll get into that more, but that is the whole idea of vampirism, is that predatory taking from others to make yourself strong. That's not cryptic. That's right on the front door. That's what it's, there's more to it, but that's the beginning layer of it. So what I was saying is, it's interesting when you have the beautiful vampires, they're sort of emphasizing how they're taking other people's life in order to make themselves grand and beautiful. With the more haggard and death-like vampires, they're sort of showing you like, this is a dark thing which is really just trying to sustain itself. Just a hunger, just an appetite, just the beast, as these various authors have described it. And so they're showing you how beastly it is. And its hunger is basically just to self-sustain. So different sides that you can emphasize with that thematically, as we'll see in these different stories.
Yeah. So we can just generally run through vampire powers. Again, varies from story to story, but we got things like regeneration. For Fever Dream, for example, George also throwing in some more dragonic aspects, because in Fever Dream, his night people, as he calls them, can regenerate lost limbs, and the process by which it happens is very much like how a lizard regrows limbs. When Joshua York describes it, it grows back and then it sheds and then it keeps growing and then sheds and then
Oh,
finally
the little baby hand.
yeah, it starts off as a little baby hand. Use my strong hand. But over the course of like a few days, it comes back good as new. But when I read it, I'm like, this sounds exactly like when a lizard regrows appendages. And it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense, because Joshua York looks very much like a Targaryen, and Targaryens are lizard people. So it makes sense that he would recycle, reuse, and take an idea he had 40 some odd years ago and just tweak it a little bit. And then now it's like, now we can apply this to our dragon people in A Song of Ice and Fire. So yeah, night vision, heat vision, superhuman strength, super speed, hypnosis, shape shifting. This is the big one because of skin changing. Common forms are bats, rats, wolves, dogs, crows. And we see that in A Song of Ice and Fire, warging into wolves, dogs, crows, possibly rats if you subscribe to the Laris Strong Green Seer theory, but that's neither here nor there.
There's no reason why you couldn't.
Yeah. But these are the common forms that vampires usually take. And then they also have control over animals. Animals can act like familiars just as humans can. And this usually will be like Count Dracula and Count Orlok both have wolves. Both Tom Hutter and John Harker, in their flight from these castles, they will be chased by wolves. Mind reading, enhanced senses, flight or levitation, immortality, though limited, because obviously they have weaknesses. And then another big one for our story, especially when it comes to Euron, is weather conjuration. Able to summon storms, mist, and fog, or also able to change into mist and fog, which will apply to the others.
And just so you guys know, this is how this stream happened. Nosferatu came out, Tim saw it, started talking about Dracula parallels very excitedly on Twitter, and we started chatting about it a little bit. And then he basically, he had me at hello. It wasn't quite hello, but it was when you mentioned that Dracula controls the storm and rides into London with a corpse at the prow of the ship and a huge storm behind. I was like, oh, okay, we got to talk about this. So, yes. And by the way, Tim, I have all of your art that you requested and sent me over ready to go, such as this vampiric Euron. The artist is Michelle's Mine or Michelle's Mini. I'm not sure which. But I used this on my Euron... I don't know. My first, I have 2 Euron videos. King of the Apocalypse, that's the one.
Yeah.
And you can see it. It's a very vampiric Euron. This artist, I think, is probably pretty Dracula inspired. It's sort of picked up on the vibes here.
Yeah, this is one of those pieces of art where I was like, I'm pretty sure he has this one, but I'm going to include it in the doc just in case.
Because he's vampiric, but it's clearly like he looks like he's either on a boat or... standing on the coast here. So with the shirt too, it looks like he's at sea with the wind blowing pretty hard. So it very much screams of that moment that we're talking about. So, and
this could be arriving or leaving. Like the look on his face, it kind of reminds me of when Victarion tells about the day that Euron left, his mocking laughter as he sailed out on the Silence. That kind of captures that moment. And then of course when Euron comes back, Victarion comments, he doesn't look like he's aged at all, even though he's been gone for years.
Yes.
He looks the same as he did the day he left.
Yeah, and that's another one where I think of Melisandre, who I'm going to mention periodically too, because the more I thought about Melisandre, the more vampire parallels I saw. But so these vampires, they have quite the array of powers, don't they?
But then we follow that with quite an array of weaknesses as well. Oh yeah, and then we got the last. May transform those they feed on into new vampires or zombie-like ghouls, and we'll see that with the others transforming the dead into wights. Those are zombie-like ghouls, and they may have humans as familiars who attend them during daylight hours. We will, of course, be talking about Renfield Hairknock, and Sour Billy Tipton from Fever Dream.
Yeah, Renfield, aka anti-John the Baptist.
Yes. And then weaknesses do include sunlight, silver, garlic. This could be garlic bulbs or garlic flower. It's important in Dracula. It is actually garlic flowers that Abraham Van Helsing hangs around Lucy and Mina Harker's windows.
And now that you pointed out, you know, George, famous for his food descriptions, shout out Glidus and all Shift X. You know, there's a lot of garlic being eaten in all these dishes, I noticed.
They cannot cross running water, which we see with the others. The others supposedly cannot cross running water, which may mean they may have to freeze the gaps in between, freeze rivers, possibly bays and lakes to cross.
And also that answers the long, persistent fandom question, why don't the others just walk around Eastwatch by the sea into the water? Like, no, they're vampires. They can't do that.
They can be weak to religious symbols, crosses, crucifixes, no reflections in mirrors, no shadows cast. I believe that's another one with the others. The others do not cast a shadow because they are in themselves shadows. They can also be weak to ultraviolet light. That's more of a modern thing. You know, Blade, the Blade movies, Blade Trinity. They must sleep during the day in a coffin or bed of soil from their birthplace. This is a big thing in Orlok and Dracula with Nosferatu and Count Dracula. They have, as part of their coming to, when they leave Romania and go to Britain and Germany, respectively, they bring a number of coffins filled with earth from their homeland with them. And they must, of course, the big one, they must regularly consume the blood of humans or animals. There's also one I just learned the other night. There, in some stories, if you place a wild rose, on the lid of a vampire's coffin, it will prevent them from being able to get out during the day. And I was like, oh, that made me think of the blue winter roses in A Song of Ice and Fire.
And also the grave of Christopher, the Hammer of Justice, that has white wild roses growing over it. Somebody once pointed out to me something about that symbolism, but I don't remember it well enough to recall it. So before we go any further. Actually, no, let's do this little bit. Before we get into Vlad the Impaler, I want to flip down to the talk about the others, because the others' vampirism, as we've started to point out, is kind of very general. It's not really tied to the specific vampire stories, more of the stuff that we just talked about. So the idea of the original vampire, Tim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so while new vampires may be created through being fed on, original vampire creation usually comes through some kind of dark magic or contract. This could be pacts with the devil or some kind of lesser demon. Count Orlok, for example, becomes a vampire through the demon Belial, which is one of Satan's commanders or lieutenants. They can come from a rejection of God or the church or a witch's spell. We'll see that in the film adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992 by Francis Ford Coppola. Gary Oldman, who plays Dracula in Vlad the Impaler, it is his rejection of God after his wife commits suicide, and the priests tell him that his wife will be denied entry to heaven because she took her own life. That is what causes him to reject God, throw his sword through the cross, and then it starts bleeding, and he begins drinking blood that comes from the cross. And that is how, in the film version, he becomes a vampire. In the novel, it's left more up for interpretation, but it is suggested that Dracula's transformation into a vampire comes from some sort of black magic and some sort of deal with the devil. And we'll talk about when we talk about the Shola Nod, the school of black magic.
Okay, so is it in Fever Dream or Bram Stoker where they try to tie this back to like Cain and wherever he left when he was expelled from the Garden of Eden and who those people were that he went to?
That's Fever Dream.
Okay. So in Fever Dream, of course, the vampires are not undead, but a weird alt-humanoid species or something. So, but
yeah,
I think
they are.
Is there any other Mark of Cain stuff woven into vampire stories or no?
Because
I kind of feel like
there is the story of Lilith, but that's more to do with Adam's first wife, Lilith.
Mm,
In some versions of the story, Lilith is a vampire or a succubus or something of that nature.
okay.
But there is, and as for Cain, like, oh, there is the idea, where does Cain's wife come from? If Adam and Eve's children all had to be incest,
Always a good question.
but Cain's wife comes from the land of Nod. Well, what's Nod? Where the hell did that come from? So where's she coming from? And it's like, well, that implies like there was a creation other than God, like something that falls outside the realm of humanity. So who are the people of Nod, and where are they coming from? It's like,
Hashtag pesky questions from Genesis.
yeah, that's a biblical plot hole.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so let me let me flip down to my some these quick notes about the others, because you just mentioned a couple of things. And here we are. So the others only come out at night, like the vampires, and have a particular moonlight affinity. In Bram Stoker, there's a lot of that. Like the moonlight comes in the window, and then the dust beams are swirling in the moonlight, and then they turn into one of the vampire ladies, you know. So the others, similarly, they've got the moon. Their swords are glowing with moonlight, and they only come out at night. Like Tim mentioned, insubstantial shadows. Tim, to me, you know, the George's version of the vampires don't appear in the mirror is that the others don't break the snow.
Yeah.
Like, because it's one of those, it doesn't really make sense. We know that they are solid at times, like they can kill people. Obviously, they're solid. You know, and it's not just like the other turns its sword solid to fight Waymar. Sam stabs it with the dragon glass and like hits it, you know? So like it's there, but not all the way there. And that's the same with the vampire. It's mostly there physically, but it's not, doesn't have a soul, so it doesn't appear in the mirror. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would say the not breaking the snow is a corruption of walking on water, because snow is frozen water, but the others cannot cross running water. So it's a mockery. It's like a mockery of one of Jesus's greatest feat. They don't break the snow. They can't walk on water.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. That is, I never thought of that. That's interesting. And then the others seem to turn into a mist, which not only is that a power of vampires, supposedly, but George particularly makes fun of that in Fever Dream, because his vampires are like real humanoids. And so most of the vampire stuff, they laugh. They're like, oh, that's not true. Garlic and crosses, that doesn't mean anything, you know. They'll turn into a mist. But several times when the vampire disappears quickly, you know, he has the character wonder, maybe they did turn into a mist. So it's something that George was playing with in the story. And the others, Tormund basically says that you can't fight a mist, you know, a mist with teeth, shadows with teeth, a mist. The others, weirdly, are said to drink blood and smell the hot blood in The Last Hero. Even though they're like ice demons, why we don't think they would really drink someone's blood, but it's this folk tale that's just sort of lets you know they're supposed to be like vampires. And then also with when Gilly has the baby, she's like, oh, they've come for the life. They can smell the life. So that's very much like, you know, the feral vampires, like they're drawn to that hot blood from the living. It's the power of the life in the blood and we'll talk about blood magic, obviously. Craster, it occurs to me, is very Renfield-like, isn't he?
Yes, because he is. If the others were to have a familiar, Craster would be the one fulfilling that role. He is the one providing them with sacrifice.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about Renfield yet, but I just want to throw that out. The others are potentially ageless, but they require blood sacrifice, just like vampires. The blood sacrifice to the weirwoods might be feeding the others. That's a potential theory as well. But we know they're taking babies from the wildlings and stuff. The others die if you stab them with the right talisman. That's just like the vampires. Instead of a wooden stake, you want dragon glass, but it's the same thing. And then Michael talks about stuff, of course, thinks that the others are literally tied to very old bodies on weirwood thrones, like Under the Wall or in Winterfell or something like that, which is a very credible idea. I think the others were certainly, created from sacrificed green seers and stuff like that. So, yeah, the others could literally have sleeping bodies somewhere. And Tim, you always talk about the idea of a sarcophagus in the heart of winter based on some of the Lovecraft stuff. But of course, we've talked about how the trees are sarcophagus. There might be an oily black stone with souls in there. These are all similar ideas.
Yeah,
So
it's not that, like, again, it doesn't have to be a literal sarcophagus, but the point is that I believe it's going to be some kind of burial mound. There's going to be, the big one is there's going to be some kind of body wrapped up in the roots of the tree, similar to, and Bloodraven is our key component to
right, and that would probably be Azor or Nissa or both or something. We'll have to see, but also, go ahead.
So, to the idea of the others drinking blood, we've also talked a lot about how there always seems to be like this intermingling of northern and far eastern myth, how the Long Night and Night's King sounds like demons out of the Long Night coming from beyond the Grey Waste, but in that same area we have the cities of the bloodless men. So the idea of the others feeding on blood could be this cultural crossover, this mix-up of others being mistaken with vampiric creatures coming out of Essos's version of the Land of Always Winter, out of vampiric creatures coming out of the Grey Waste.
Yes. The Grey Waste is, probably full of monsters of every sort. That's definitely what it sounds like. And then you just mentioned the first vampire idea. The show went with that very much, where like they turned one person and made the Night King, and then the Night King made the others, and the others are weaker than him. The Night King is stronger. That is exactly the formula that Tim is talking about. We have yet to be seen if there is one Night King that's a physical entity. I tend to think about that more as an entity inside the weirwood net, but we'll see. It might be looking to body snatch a body, and then there would be something like that. But certainly the show went with that, which was...
Yeah, the show went with, the original vampire, because they could have titled Head Vampire, Master Vampire. In Fever Dream, it's Blood Master, but one of the ideas is that if you kill the head vampire, the rest will fall with him, and that's exactly what the show did. As soon as Arya stabbed Night's King, all the other White Walkers shattered.
Yes, exactly. So that's classic sort of, the show was sort of picking up on the vampire vibes and just sort of used it to flesh that out. And that did kind of make sense to me. I didn't really have a problem with that. One thing, I think you're going to like this, Tim. The whole thing about Jafer Flowers and Othor. The Night's Watch carried them across the wall. And that's the only reason we think they were able to cross. Because normally we think the dead things and shadows cannot pass the wall. So... That reminds me a lot of how the vampires have to be invited in. So it was very much like that. Like they had to carry, and the show did it too with the ice mark thing. Like the ice mark allowed the Night King to pass the wall, his touching, or not to pass the wall, but to enter Bloodraven's cave.
Yeah,
that's what it was. So that's a similar thing. So these are again folkloric beliefs that kind of are all over the stories, but. Oh, yeah, and real quick, thank you, Martin Crow and Jaceres, for super chats, cheering us on with enthusiasm for the topic. I saw those. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah. So, like, so in the show, Night's King's invite is more like the version of sticking your foot in the door and not letting anyone close it on you. He just kind of forced his way into an invite. But, yeah. But it was Bran wandering around.
You know what I mean? And once the Night King touched him, then he was able to get in the cave. So kind of similar. And we think, my theory is that the others need Jon's body to cross the wall. And that Jon will be the one to be able to invite them over. I think that's the foreshadowing with Jon letting the wildlings through the wall when the wildlings are all covered in the other language and stuff, as we've talked about. So the others and whites obviously create more whites. Just like vampires create other vampires and or like sort of zombie-like servants and stuff. So there's obviously a lot of plague themes going on in all the various Dracula and Nosferatu stories. And so that contagion idea is paralleled to the actual spreading of the vampire bites. It's all in parallel, the rat bites, etc. And you notice the wildlings, they want to be burned when they die, so their souls won't be enslaved as whites. That reminded me of Bram Stoker, the Bram Stoker story, Tim, because the afterlife is a heavy motivator and driver of all the characters. Like, they don't mind dying as long as they're not imprisoned under the vampire's spell. And if they can free their dead companion from possession, then everyone's happy. So it's kind of like that with the wildlings. They're like, yeah, I might die tomorrow. Just please burn my body, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So, no, I did not Fenrisian. I'm not familiar with that word. You know that one, Tim?
The Legend of Sight as an Instrument. No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yep, don't know that one. So yeah, okay, that's pretty much all I had to say about the others. We can maybe talk about Craster when we come back to Renfield, but you mentioned half of that stuff in your flow right there. So the others are very basic in their vampirism. A lot of it is vibes and folklore and how you fight them and stuff. Probably less of a commentary on their true nature and the elvish stuff, but we will talk about Azor Ahai is more vampiric because he's always, stealing power and killing people to do it. But let's talk about Vlad the Impaler, and by way of Vlad, that'll get us into some Boltons.
Yes, let's talk about Vlad the Impaler.
That's a pretty cool shirt.
Yeah, this is like one of the most portraits of Vlad the Impaler. There's also a number of famous woodcuts depicting him, usually eating out in his courtyard among impaled corpses.
There's portrait of Tracy, and then there's portrait of Vlad the Impaler. Let me pull up these pictures. You've got some Vlad the Impaler pictures, I believe. Do you want me to pull them up when you're ready, or is there some you want to show first?
Well, no, I did want to show Gary Oldman in his Vlad armor, especially because we're going to be talking about Ramsay. Again, this is from the 1992 film adaptation of Dracula. This is Gary Oldman playing Vlad the Impaler before he becomes the vampire Dracula. And I just want everyone to take notice of the style of armor he's wearing, because then you could compare what he's wearing to Ramsay's flayed man armor when Ramsay
this one in particular.
When Ramsay drops the Reek personification and takes Winterfell from Theon and then puts the torch to it. The flayed man, you can see, it's like, George, you look at this, you look at Gary Oldman's armor, and it's like, George, I see what you did. I see where the inspiration came from. And then, of course, we have other images of Ramsay in the flayed man armor from other angles.
And then let's just go ahead and show the castle thing real quick. This is Vlad's castle. The top is an artist's reconstruction, correct? And the bottom is what's left?
Yeah, the bottom is what's left. You can still visit. This is Ponari Castle. It was the seat of Vlad's seat, and it still stands today outside of Budapest. You can visit it. It takes, but you have to climb. There's no elevator or escalator or anything. You have to climb 1,460.
You have to replicate the terror of Jonathan Harker's experience, essentially, climbing through the very obviously scary forest and the steep hills. And somebody's been there, Captain Tachenka. Very cool. Outside of Budapest, he says. Now, by way of comparison, look at this castle. This is the newest art of the Dread Fort from Eddie Mendoza and the newest Ice and Fire calendar, and behold, it's Dracula's castle.
You got circular. Your towers start at circle and then comes at points, and then it's pink, and then you got see the flight. You could see, it's almost like you could see the stairs, as if behind this mounting arc that there could be stairs carved in that. It's like, and then considering the fact that the calendar art all gets the final approval from George, for it to bear this much of a resemblance to
look at those towers, especially the towers, like in the pink stone.
And they're pink. Yep.
So just letting you know, it is what it is. It's Vlad's, it's his version of Vlad's castle. And this is interesting. A lot of times with George, like, he doesn't bother to really he's not trying to hide it. He's inviting you to like check out his commentary on all this stuff. Like he's trying to say, yeah, this is my version of this. Definitely check it out. And that's the first step towards sort of uncovering whatever George is trying to talk about. So let's go back to the notes, Tim, and I will turn you loose on Vlad. Let me take this 30 seconds to run down and get some fresh eye drops. My eyes are burning a little bit still, and I'll be right back. Tim, you're in good hands with Grey Waste, Tim, as you know, but this will just take me a second. So thanks, Tim.
Sure. So Vlad the Impaler. So he is Vlad III Tepish, Voivode of Wallachia, which is Prince, so to make it easier on us. Ruled from 1448 to 1477, though I do have an asterisk in there. It was not a straight run. Vlad was deposed a number of times, was off the throne, went into exile, came back, retook it, got overthrown again, came back, retook it, and this played out until his ultimate death, which which historians place somewhere in late 1476, early 1477. Vlad was a member of the house of Draculas. He takes the name Dracula, which can, depending on how you translate it, can either mean son of the dragon or son of the devil. And this comes from his father, Vlad II Dracul. Vlad II was a member of the Order of the Dragon. This was a Christian order. It was a mix of Catholic and Eastern Orthodox members united in fighting for Christendom, mainly against the Ottoman Turks and trying to prevent the spread of Islam into Eastern Europe. And they were a military order modeled after the military orders of the Crusades. And what's interesting to note is that Vlad himself shares many similarities to Ramsay Bolton. The Boltons are pretty much an obvious Vlad the Impaler metaphor because of their act of how close flaying and impalement are. Very, very unique forms of torture that this family and and Vlad become famous for. But Vlad and Ramsay, they are both second sons. Vlad had an older brother. Very little is known about Vlad's mother, but it is known that his father had many, many mistresses. So there is a possibility that Vlad may have also been bastard born. They both had true-born elder brothers who died young. For Ramsay, this would be Domeric Bolton. And for Vlad the Impaler, this would be Mercia II. Both of them died young, which is what causes Ramsay to be the heir apparent and what caused Vlad to become the heir. But the style in which they died, Domeric Bolton died of poison, which to me seems out of character for Ramsay. Because I feel like if Ramsay were to kill someone, he'd want to do it in a way that he could observe. However, Mercia II was killed in a very Ramsay-esque way. He was blinded with a red-hot poker and buried alive. And this is actually where I want to bring up to the chat what chat's opinion is on the death of Domeric. Do you think Ramsay did it? Or because I think Ramsay's mother, or possibly even the original Reek, may have played a role in the death of Domeric. Because as they say, poison is a woman's weapon. Roose Bolton told Ramsay's mother never to tell Ramsay who he was, but she blatantly disregarded that, told Ramsay, you are the son of Roose Bolton, filled his head with ideas of his rights and what was owed to him. And when Domeric comes to visit Ramsay, finds out he has a younger brother, when he arrives, like, you gotta look at it this way. When the son of your lord comes, it doesn't matter how much food you have. You're going to make a place at the table for that guy. But that opens up the opportunity. If Domeric starts regularly visiting Ramsay, is his mother now using this as an opportunity as a form of revenge against Roose Bolton? Does she kill Domeric to open the way for Ramsay to become the heir?
I buy it simply because of the level of hate that she should have for Ramsay would be the fuel for this. Like, it's such an awful story. We don't need to go back into it, but if you just think about how you'd feel because
Mhm.
not only was it, an R wording and a conception based on that, but like he killed her husband. I guess we are going into it. Like, and he's hanging from the tree
Mhm.
while the act is being done. It's like it's just unbelievably psychologically cruel and malevolent. I mean, there aren't words. These words fall far short of the actual reality. Like, so once you survive that, the hate that you would have, yeah, like oh no, you're like your son's not gonna live. It's gonna be my son. You did this to
Mhm.
me, and so here's what we're gonna do. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that definitely makes sense. Tim, it's a little side theory, but sort of
Yeah.
strengthened by this reference. So keep going here, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, both of the brothers. So both Ramsay and well, the Boltons in general and Vlad betray the houses they are sworn to and wage war against them. The Starks are supposed to be vassals of. I mean, the Boltons are vassals of the Starks, but they betray them. Take Winterfell. The House of Draculeste was supposed to be vassals to the Imperial House of Osmond. Even though Vlad Dracul was a member of the Order of the Dragon, he got his butt whooped by the Turkish so many times that he ended up having to give up Vlad and Vlad's younger brother as a hostage. So Vlad actually has a connection to Theon Greyjoy in that regard. And Vlad grows up in as a Turkish hostage, as like just as Theon is. It's like no, he has to grow up knowing like you are here only to keep your father in line. Yeah, we're gonna treat you well. We're gonna educate you. We're gonna teach you. We're gonna give you a master at arms. You're gonna live a comfortable life, but you are just a very high value hostage. And should your father step out of the line, we're gonna kill you. Vlad grew up knowing that the knife was always dangling over his head, and he grew up resenting that. And that comes full tilt when he comes into his own and becomes Prince of Wallachia. He's going to remember he's going to remember his subjugation by the Turks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's funny. Again, George sort of breaks apart some of the inspiring parts of a source story and uses them in different places. So,
Hmm.
and
But
this is something that we caught as far as talking about the impalement is in fact Ramsay does do some impalement. So this is after they take Moat Cailin. Ramsay uses Theon as a decoy to get the Ironborn to surrender, and then immediately, well, it says the flayed man of House Bolton was hoisted above the gatehouse tower where Reek had hauled down the golden kraken of Pike. Along the rotting plank road, wooden stakes were driven deep into the boggy ground. There the corpses festered, red and dripping. 63, he knew. There are 63 of them. So they've been impaled on stakes. So we deviated from the normal flaying this time to do some Vlad the Impaling. So it's just, again, George hanging a very macabre lampshade on it, as it were.
yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned, yeah, both are infamous for a unique form of torture, impalement, and flaying. Both of them have a morbid sense of humor about their torture. Vlad would comment on impaled victims twitching like frogs, and he would get like little giggle fits about it. um, they both, as you said, both use the language of the enemy. Ramsay uses Theon as a decoy to get into Moat Cailin. Vlad the Impaler, having grown up in a Turkish court, knew how to speak Turkish fluently. And one of the ways that he uses that to his advantage is in the battle at Targo Viste, the burning of Targo Viste. Vlad and his men don Turkish uniforms, and Vlad speaks Turkish to the guards posted outside. And because Vlad can speak perfect Turkish and is wearing Turkish uniforms, and of course his men are keeping their mouths shut, they are able to get in and they set fire to the camp. So again, they're both use scorched earth tactics. Ramsay burns down Winterfell. Vlad, in his flight from Budapest, he leaves scorched earth behind at Nikopol. Just give the Turks nothing. And then we said Ramsay's flayed man armor resembles the armor worn in the 1992 film. We went over the Dreadfort, And then, despite their violence abroad, Vlad's rule over Wallachia saw peace at home and crime at a low because obviously there's a story of Vlad the Impaler once leaving a silver cup outside of his castle, and days go by and nobody steals it. Even though there are beggars and peasants, nobody dares even lay a finger on that cup. And this reminds me of Roose Bolton's attitude towards the Dreadfort and its surrounding lands. His quote is, "A peaceful land, a quiet people."
Yeah, that's a good comparison for sure. So basically, it's not just the impalement and the creepy vibes. George is sort of taking the military strategy, using deception and then scorched earth, basically like the psychopathic total war, and he's having the Boltons use that. And then also, at the Red Wedding itself, I was thinking about it, Tim. This is, of course, when Roose steps up and stabs Robb to finish him off. But the Red Wedding itself is like, that's the wedding between Dracula and his bride. That's a red wedding. If you think about, like, the green wedding is Bran wedding the trees and stuff, and the alchemical wedding is Dany wedding the fire, and breathing life into the dragons. Like, when you talk about a red wedding, that would be a name for the end of the Nosferatu movie. That was the red wedding, when Dracula finally gets to feed on his bride. And so it's interesting that here at the red wedding, we have Roose Dracula Bolton stepping up to impale Robb through the heart there. So don't know what that's worth. Just thought I'd throw it out.
So
you weren't impressed. Tim wasn't impressed.
I don't know. So I was just trying to get my next thought in order because
I know Tim, you're excited. You clearly had, there's a lot going on here, but
I also saw, because someone in the chat had said, like, how somehow they were talking about in the show Yara, so not Asha Greyjoy, Yara Greyjoy sailing back to the Iron Islands so quickly, and somehow Orlok sails from Romania to Germany, and that got me thinking, like, yeah, how the hell did he do that? And I was like, oh, he had to go through the Black Sea, so he would have had to take the long way around, but it's by going through the Black Sea and through the Dardanelles around the Rock of Gibraltar. That is how Orlok sails from Transylvania to Wisborg, Germany. And yet, and Bram and Dracula, they both, coming by ship, they're both taking the long way.
So let's get into the Dracula story, which you can do on audiobook. There's a great Audible version with a cast reading, because, of course, Dracula, the book, let me just say, I didn't going into it, I had no idea what to expect. In case you've never read it, the entire book is composed of letters. And so what basically, everybody's keeping diaries, because back then you didn't have social media. That's what you do. You write in your journal, your diary, or whatever. And so the entire story is different characters reading their own accounts. And throughout as the story goes, you see the characters in the story compiling their journals. Like, one character is like, okay, we need to get the story together, so everybody give me your journals and we'll keep them in one place and have this record of all the information. And that's what we end up reading as the book, which is fun because, Tim, it creates a little bit of the time jump, Memento, Dark, Back to the Future. Just the timeline is a little screwy. Like, things can cut away. Then, it's the last letter we got from that guy at the castle. We don't hear from him again for a while until he turns up in London in somebody else's plot. And so the format of the book itself is very interesting. So I highly recommend the classic Bram Stoker Dracula if you haven't done that. And so I really enjoyed it, Tim. And I saw how it's one of those things, like when you listen to the first heavy rock records, like Black Sabbath or something, it's not heavy in the way that modern heavy is, but you can hear the groundbreaking nature and the template being set, right? Or like Led Zeppelin or something. And so it's like that with Bram Stoker. It's like certain ideas are better developed in subsequent versions and stuff. However, no, not enough noticed it exactly. No, I don't hate mustaches, so.
Opposite. I actually got my hair cut and my beard trimmed yesterday.
Yeah, I trimmed mine too. So sorry, we're going with the handsome devil thing, and and then so basically, even though subsequent versions of Dracula maybe push certain themes further and in interesting places, you can see the brilliance of the original version. So it was written, Tim, in 1897.
Yes, and like you said, it is a collection of letters, journal entries, diary entries, and Bram Stoker wrote this to be like we as the reader are supposed to play the role of the detective, just like the men and women involved in the story. And he did that because 10 years earlier, 1887, is when the first Sherlock Holmes book came out and had taken Britain by storm. So yeah, so it is a gothic monster story, but also a detective story, and we are following along, trying to figure out all the clues and figure all this out with our protagonists, with Jonathan Harker and Abraham Van Helsing, Quincy Morris, and all the others.
So that's one of the striking differences between the original Nosferatu and Dracula. Is like Nosferatu is obviously the silent film with limited dialogue, and it's a lot of ambiance, if you will. Whereas there's so much exposition in Bram Stoker, it's almost like more exposition than we're really used to. But it is because, like you said, it is that detective format where the characters in the story are talking about the world building. They're trying to figure out, well, what are his powers? What are his weaknesses? So they can defeat him. Yeah. So it's the novelty of it. And someone even pointed out that this version of Dracula isn't really that hard to kill if you know what to do. It's the fact that no one knows really. Van Helsing has some idea, but nobody really knows kind of what's going on,
Yeah. And yes, Jasmine, I will give a shout out to Carmilla, because yes, Count Dracula was not the first vampire story, but it definitely was the one that really saw the genre of vampire stories take off. But not the first, but did a lot of legwork in getting us to where we are today.
Well, the end of that thought was that Eggers, drawing from all previous versions of this story, brought a little bit more of that exposition, monster hunter, detective vibes into his Nosferatu. Not nearly so much, but yeah, they did bring in a little bit of that. And obviously, what's the name of the Van Helsing character in Nosferatu, played by
Alban Eberhard von Franz.
Von Franz, right? And he's played by the actor that was
Willem Dafoe.
Right, who was Dracula in a previous version, right?
He was in 2000's Shadow of the Vampire, which is like, it's kind of a weird. I recommend the film, but it's like a fourth wall break. What Shadow of the Vampire is? It's a movie about the making of the original Nosferatu. Only in this, the vampire is real. So Willem Dafoe plays a vampire pretending to be a German actor named Max Schreck.
Which I'm interested to watch, because that sounds kind of funny. A funny take on it.
He's a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
That's something like that, right? So that was a cool shout out, and yeah, Eggers really did do a good job of bringing back some of that monster hunter goodness from Bram Stoker into the new one. But let you get back to the notes here. So you said Transylvania translates to beyond the forest, which is. Go ahead.
And I'm from Pennsylvania, which is Pennswoods, and there's that classic Simpsons show. We're going to Mr. Burns' castle in Pennsylvania.
Ooh. And my family is also from Pennsylvania, so small world, but yeah, been there many times. But as we talked about, beyond the forest, this is easy stuff as far as symbolism goes. Like, the idea of the forest and the sea are very similar in that they represent the subconscious and the unknown, things that you're afraid of. You never know what could come out of there. Once you're in there, you're kind of lost. It's not our natural environment, and mankind likes to tame it if they can. But yeah, it's like when you're on the sea in a boat, there's this healthy fear and respect of the sea, kind of similar when you're in the woods. Like you have to read the signs and know what's going on, and maybe not wander into animals' dens and things, and watch out for the undead, if depending on what the forest is. So Transylvania being beyond the forest, it's kind of like the heart of winter beyond the heart haunted forest, or what's in the heart of the forest or beyond the forest. It's very scary and primal, and that's where he comes from. And Bram Stoker also, I feel like the way that in Bram Stoker they talk about the old powers. Dracula talks about representing the old ways and the old people that resisted the Turks and this and that. It reminds me of the first men and the children of the forest, and the way that they're talked about, like, oh, we're gone, but we're not quite gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, and we'll talk about that when Dracula talks about himself as a nobleman, but yes, may have been inspired by the real world Wallachian prince. There is some debate because in Bram Stoker's notes, Vlad doesn't come up, and rather he found the name Dracula and saw that it meant dragon and just thought that was cool. But then later on, it seems as he learned about Vlad the Impaler, he then later on incorporated ideas, because we get this section from this is Abraham Van Helsing speaking. He must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland. If it be so, then he was no common man, for in that time and for centuries after, he was spoken of as the cleverest and most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest. But our Dracula, when we meet him, is posing as a Transylvanian nobleman who is looking to buy property near London. Jonathan Harker is a newly licensed sort of real estate agent. I believe the term was solicitor. But he is sent to Transylvania to do business with the Count and secure him buying this property. When Dracula is talking, he claims he ancestry from Attila the Hun. So he's dating himself way, way, way back.
And if I could pause you right here, Tim, this is an important thematic element in all the stories, which Nosferatu, the new one, really brings to the foreground. It's like he is chasing after something. There is greed going on here. And in Nosferatu, they really highlight it by showing you that the wife doesn't want this. She just don't go. I'm fine. We don't need the promotion, et cetera, et cetera. But he is trying to live up to his idea of masculinity and be a provider. And so he's got to go forward and get the house. And they've got the whole touch with the flowers in Nosferatu, which symbolizes how he doesn't know what she wants and stuff like that. But in all the versions, it starts off with like this choice that the Jonathan Harker character has, where he's trying to claw up into the world. And so as he's going on this mission, he gets more and more signs that this is a bad idea. And again, it reminds me of the approach to the Red Wedding, when you can just feel like this, we shouldn't go here. Like just it's raining and the wolf doesn't like the phrase, and just like they keep going woodenly, stubbornly to their doom. And that's how it feels in Bram Stoker, especially with Jonathan Harker approaching the castle and all the Romani and people are telling him, please don't go, it's a bad idea. And he's like, well, that's all superstition. I've got a job because I'm a solicitor, and so on we go. I'm not scared of wolves. And
I'm sure there's at least one person in the chat who works on commission who will say like, yeah, everything feels wrong, but I gotta make this sale, man. The commission's gonna be so good if I can nail it.
Yep, I worked on commission for many years, so I get that. And that's just an important element that I wanted to highlight. We don't need to wax poetic, but yeah, there's that first choice. And then when he gets to the castle, of course, there's the whole contract and, him trying to trick him into signing over his wife. But it's a proxy. Like he's basically, saying sign on to this bad deal because you want money. And there's an even worse consequence, almost like Dany with Miri Mazdur saying, oh, bring Drogo back. And she's like, oh, I didn't know that the price would be my baby. And she's like, you knew the price,
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that with his deal with Dracula.
Yeah. So while with Dracula, unlike the repulsive corpse-like creature that normally would come out of Eastern European myth, and that's where and Nosferatu differs in this regard because they stick with this. Orlok does resemble a walking corpse. Our Count Dracula is handsome, charismatic, charming. And then we get that quote: "He was in life a most wonderful man, soldier, statesman, and alchemist, which latter was the highest development of the scientific knowledge of his time. He had a mighty brain, a learning beyond compare, and a heart that knew no fear and no remorse. He dared to even attend the Sholomonts, and there was no branch of knowledge of his time that he did not essay." And this is where, so we start talking about the Sholomonts because George has his own version of the Sholomonts, and that is Asshai. And who has, or at least claims to have been to Asshai? Euron.
Right, because Asshai is this place where you go to learn all the dark arts. That's kind of why you go there, yeah.
Yeah. So the Sholomance is situated, School of Black Arts situated high in the Carpathian Mountains. Asshai down at the bottom of the mountains of the Morn, where the mountain range opens up. Sholomant, fabled school of black magic, said to be run by the devil himself. The school would enroll about 10 students to become the Solomonari, who is a wizard believed in Romanian folklore to ride a dragon and control the weather. And anyone who's watched Dave and I talk about Ironborn streams, anytime Euron comes up, both of these things always come up. Euron is a Stormbringer, and Euron more than likely going to ride a dragon.
You know, that's interesting because, of course, in Elric, the Black Dragon Sword is called Stormbringer. And it doesn't really control storms. I'm not even sure why it's called Stormbringer, to be honest. It mostly brings on a storm of like violence and fury and stuff like that. If it does have, there's a lot of Elric, so if it does control the storm somewhere, maybe, but like it's not really the main thing about it. It's got a evil dragon spirit in the sword that whispers to Elric and just sort of draws him into a blood fury when he pulls the sword out, and it drinks the souls of everyone he slays. And he doesn't, once it comes out, he's not always in control of who dies. Just a lot of people die. Then he comes to, he's like, oh shit, what happened? You know? But the fact that it's called Stormbringer and it is the template for Lightbringer, it's interesting to have Euron trying to become this Bloodstone Emperor Azor Ahai figure with his dragon armor and his dragon horn and his intent to summon a dragon, and he literally is the Stormbringer in the Dracula sense. So interesting.
Yeah. Oh, and then Peter Windhorst bring up sometimes the number of students is actually 13, not 10. The 13th host is the one sold to the devil. So that can make us think of like a corrupted version of Jesus and the 12 apostles, of the last hero and his 12 followers. All of that. So, and more like why is 13 an unlucky number? Well, here's just another reason to tack on to that. The 13th member of the School of Black Magic becomes the Antichrist.
And a lot of that is going to be rooted to the Zodiac as well, which is a super old belief. But let's see here. So you got, okay, so let's stop right here. I want to skip ahead to something that we've got about, because we skipped over this earlier, but right at the top, Dracula literally means son of the devil, son of the dragon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Actually, no. I've changed my mind. Let's get through the Dracula, and then we'll go into this section I have, which expands on that topic exactly. But let's see.
Okay.
Let's actually keep going with the Dracula story. I think that'll make it better. So we're here. He studied in the mountains.
Yeah.
At this Scholomance thing, and he is the Solomonary.
Yeah. Other courses taught conclude speech to animals and magic spells. Possible that makes us think of skin changing. We don't have time to go on Euron skin changer debate, but it opens up the possibility if George wants to go down that road. But we also got to remember too, there'd be other students in this school. So Euron is just one of many students. If we think of other students learning things other than dragon riding and storm bringing, well, then Bran could be our potential other student in this class. He is learning skin changing. He is learning to commune and talk to animals and that type of thing with Bloodraven. So Dracula sails from Wallachia and he winds up in the town of Whitby on the ship the Demeter. And the Demeter is named for the Greek goddess of the harvest, and she is the mother of Persephone. During his travel, he kills and feeds on the crew. He's picking them off one by one, until all that is left is the captain, Captain Elliot. And he binds himself to the wheel and affixes a crucifix to himself. So when the Demeter finally makes it to dock in Whitby, it is literally a ghost ship. All that is on there is this corpse bound to the wheel of the ship. Everyone else is gone. And then that immediately made me think of our Song of Ice and Fire line. A corpse stood at the prow of a ship, eyes bright in his dead face, gray lips smiling sadly. Sometimes we think this is Euron, but this might actually... I've come to the idea that this line is in reference to the damp hair, because then in the Forsaken, we get Euron saying, bind them to the prows, my brother on the silence. Take one for yourself. Let them dice for the others, one to a ship. Let them feel the spray, the kiss of the drowned god, wet and salty. So the damp hair, Euron Greyjoy, may be the Captain Elliot figure. He is the drowned man tied to the prow of the ship. Euron, before becoming a drowned priest, was a captain in his own right. He was captain of the Golden Storm back when he was like an Ironborn frat boy. So the corpse at the prow of the ship, gray lips smiling sadly, Greyjoy. This actually might not be Euron. This may be in reference to the damp hair playing this Captain Elliot role.
And interestingly, the damp hair, if you change it to the F sound, damn fair, his name sounds a lot like Damphir, Damphir, which is another vampire legend. Which one? Where's that from? The Damphir?
Damphirs are the offspring of vampires and humans. They are half vampires.
There you go. And we do like hybrids around the Iron Islands. So basically what you've got is that Euron Greyjoy is not a vampire character, but he's going to step into a vampire story as the corpse at the prow of the ship, like the captain. And I think it's a very strong parallel to the captain, because the captain ties himself to the wheel. And basically part of his thinking is that everyone will know he didn't abandon his post, because it's the sacred thing. The captain goes down with the ship. You never abandon the ship. So he ties himself there. So it's like, even if I die, people will know I didn't abandon my post. So it's a kind of honor to his craft. And Euron Greyjoy, he will surely go down worshiping the drowned god. Like, he's going to be essentially dying in the storm, and sort of meeting his god in a way. I think you could see, if the Squishers have any plans to spring on Euron, they could use Euron as their instrument. So it may not be the end of his life, but it will either be a near-death experience or a death experience. So that was a really good find, Tim. And just backing up to the name of the ship, the Demeter, that brings in, of course, the Persephone and Demeter Hades myth, which has to do with the cycle of the seasons. And essentially, Hades and Persephone is the origin, the classical mythological origin of this vampire and maiden archetype, or death and maiden archetype. We've seen it in paintings. It's in other stories other than the vampire stories, but it's basically the starting point for the vampire story. So do you want to riff on that for a minute and explain what that is about?
Yes. So Persephone is abducted by Hades. And that aside, as far as Greek myth goes, Hades actually not too bad of a husband, aside from the abduction thing. But
he's not the devil, but he is the lord of the underworld, and he does have the black horses, very much like Dracula has the black horses and carriage that he carries people off in. So
it's just, if your only knowledge of Greek myth is Disney's Hercules, you're not getting the correct story. But yeah, so Hades abducts Persephone. While she is there, she eats pomegranate seeds, and we get a similar thing with we get a lot of this with Littlefinger and Sansa when they're eating the blood oranges. Has a lot. It refers a lot of the imagery of Hades, Persephone, and the pomegranate. Because because Persephone consumes two of the four seeds that was offered to her, she must spend half the year with Hades. But because she is gone, this sends Demeter into anger, depression. Demeter, who is the goddess of the harvest, will not bring the harvest. That is what, and this is our story of the cycle of the seasons. Fall and winter come because Demeter is sad that her daughter is going away, and so she's not going to work.
Winter right. And then eventually the compromise is reached where there's a longer story. We don't need to go into it, but there was a mission. They go into hell and they talk to Hades and they work it out. And basically, yeah, she can come for half the year up to the world, and then half the year she has to go back down to the underworld. And this keeps everyone happy. In some versions, Hades and Persephone, love each other, and otherwise it's more of a abduction or whatever. But essentially, the movement of Persephone from the underworld to the upper world mimics the life returning to the plants in spring and summer, and then sort of draining out during the fall and winter, and then returning again. So that's what's being described. But really, if you start thinking about the ending of, and jumping ahead, Nosferatu, where the maiden has to give herself to the vampire in order to save everyone, that is very Persephone-like. So we can see that theme of the monster and the maiden that's in Persephone and Hades, it's touched on in different ways by the different authors of these vampire stories, but all of them are conscious of it.
Yeah. So when our ship docks, it's accompanied by a strange fog. There are witnesses and onlookers who say, along with the fog, that this is a weird storm, a storm that Britain hasn't seen in ages.
One second, Tim, real quick. The chat is... I neglected to finish that train of thought. Yes, Lyanna and Rhaegar, obviously the ice and fire version of Hades and Persephone. Rhaegar riding the black horse, abducting, but maybe not. The spring maiden with her, rose crown, and they even did the whole spring ritual with the pole and all that stuff, the maypole. So yeah, hopefully you guys are all familiar with that. But absolutely, Rhaegar and Lyanna are very Hades and Persephone. And that does make Rhaegar vampire-coded, and we'll talk about the Targaryens being vampire-coded later. And George's fever dream vampire, Joshua York, is very Rhaegar. So, but back to Bram Stoker. These are all interconnected, but I did want to highlight that Demeter thing because it's right here. Bram Stoker introduces it as part of the story. And then later, that's why. It's because of the Hades and Persephone thing. So,
yeah. But the big point is that when Dracula arrives in England, he has brought a storm with him. And then in the end of the story, when Dracula realizes the jig is up, he's discovered, and he makes his flight back to Romania, again, they are going into a storm, trying to go after him. So it's very like Euron. Do I control the winds? Euron. I am the storm, the first and last. Again, Dracula is a Stormbringer. Euron is a Stormbringer. This is all playing into not just his storm god connections and all the King in Yellow stuff that I could talk about on another time, but also his vampiric aspects. This Dracula motif that George is borrowing.
So if you think about what Euron seems to be setting up to do at Old Town, he's tying a bunch of holy men and priests and folly of flowers to the front of ships to do blood magic to create some sort of storm to roll into Old Town with. So he's about to do a grand Dracula entrance using blood magic. It's very, very, very drawn from the story. Go ahead.
And the last tidbit was witnesses also claim to see a wolf running from the ship. That is, Dracula has shapeshifted into a wolf. Again, we got more skin changing. And the wolf also, when the attacks start happening, before people, nobody immediately goes, oh, it's a vampire. Like, this wolf sighting begins people thinking like, oh, it's that wolf. It's some kind of wild animal. That becomes the first culprit to get the blame when people start turning up bitten and dead and all that.
So Clover Azar, jumping ahead to the character of Mina, who is the second lady bitten by Dracula, and she's the one that has the psychic link to Dracula that they use. They put her under hypnosis, and they can sort of hear Dracula's surroundings and figure out he's on the river still. That's Mina, and she's the one they're watching to see if she turns before they can kill Dracula, right? So somebody's saying, is Melora Hightower Mina Harker? Meaning, Tim, we've talked about, this is my newest idea about the Hightowers, is like if they've got a glass candle up there, the Mad Maid, Melora Hightower, and what's the guy's name? Lord Leighton. Leystone Hightower. If they have a glass candle up there, like it seems like they might, then they might be in contact with Euron. They might both be members of Starry Wisdom cult, flat out, or Euron may have simply contacted them, and the Hightowers might do what they always do, which is let the overwhelming force come in and just put a crown on their head and say, please don't burn our nice library and observatory and gyroscope thingy. So if that's the case, she would be like Mina Harker. She's got the psychic connection to the vampire, and she's sort of drawing it in. Or at least like trying to, I don't know. It could be opposing, could be subverted to it. We don't know. But either one would be interesting, right?
Yeah, because I do believe that Leighton is aware of Euron, knows he's coming, but the Hightowers are opportunists. They've always been. That's the way they've all, since Maegor, they kept one foot in each camp during the Blackfire rebellions. They are always doing this. It's like they're willing to, except for the Dance of the Dragons, which was like their best chance to take it. That's when they went all in. Otherwise, though, they've always just been fence sitters, looking to see who's going to come out on top until something threatens them themselves, and then they just like, okay, I guess we'll go with you. Please don't hurt me.
So, let's see here. And then, so for Dracula's goal, you've got. So, what are we establishing here?
So, because what's weird is like Dracula. There was the question every time because I've read Dracula like twice now, and even I like had a hard time grasping. But but what does he have to gain in all of this? And what really it is Dracula in a reverse of Euron, because Euron's trying to ascend to something more than human. Dracula's coming to Great Britain, coming to what at that time the British Empire at the peak of its power. Dracula's coming here more in a way of trying to reclaim his humanity, because it's an interest. I said in our notes, he is trying to relearn how to be human. He has lived for centuries, and he is longing for new experiences. It's boredom is one of the things that drives Dracula to leave Transylvania and come to England and try to establish himself there. So, and it is to corrupt the image of Victorian aristocracy. And then we get like Jonathan Harker. There was a mocking smile on the bloated face, which seemed to drive me mad. This was the being I was helping to transfer to London, where perhaps for centuries to come, he might, amongst its teeming millions, satiate his lust for blood and create a new and ever-widening circle of semi-demons to batten on the helpless. So if we think of like a second coming of Azor Ahai, a second coming of Night's King, and Euron playing that figure, this is the driving force, but it's being done in reverse. Euron is trying to become the godlike creature that Dracula is, whereas Dracula, while he's still trying to maintain that and be like a king of vampires, it is actually a very human force that is driving him to make this decision in the first place.
Right. And that's why I was highlighting that whole motivation of Jonathan Harker at the beginning. That's what keeps him to keep on going. And so that's because it's important to take the villainous aspects of Dracula and parallel them in the other characters and in society. So in the sense that like Dracula is very wealthy and cultured and all that, it's inviting you to think about the ways in which the wealthy and the elite in society prey on the weak and treat the weak as disposable. That would be especially true in the 1800s and early 1900s. Or if you look at, again, the greed, and it's the most innocent kind of greed. You know, Jonathan Harker, or the other characters that parallel him. I mean, it's not bad to try to get a better job and work hard for your promotion and to take the hard job in order to prove yourself at the company. Like, these aren't bad things. It's more that his wife was saying, we don't need those things, that made it like, hey, you should stop and listen to her. And instead he doesn't. But it's all about consumption and greed, essentially. Instead of being satisfied with what you have, you know, always questing for more, and how that eventually, you know, because that's what happens to Dracula, especially the Nosferatu version, is it's like they play that greed against him. So it's important to see those themes paralleled in the other characters that are in the villain. Because, yeah, the villain's always supposed to reflect the evil and the stuff that's in everyone else and in society. So there's a lot of putting society on trial in all of these stories, you know.
Yeah. And then the next one, this applies to Euron, but also to Bran, where Van Helsing compares Dracula to a child, but one that is learning. He's trying his power slowly but surely. That big child brain of his is working. Well, for us, it is as yet a child brain, for had he dared at the first to attempt certain things, he would long ago have been beyond our power. He means to succeed, and a man who has centuries before him can afford to wait and to go slow. Now, Euron and Bran do not have centuries unless they're able to tap into some kind of key magical component. If Euron becomes whited, becomes a Night's King figure, then potentially he would have centuries at his disposal. Whereas Bran is not going to have centuries to live, but he is going to download centuries of knowledge into that big child brain of his, downloading the weirwood net.
Interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, I didn't think of that when I read that passage, but now I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is big brain time.
And certainly there may be older things in the weirwood net that are waiting. So somebody asked if the new Nosferatu is worth seeing. Yeah, it's a masterpiece. It's really good.
Yeah.
So the cinematography is stunning. The acting is incredible. If you like, you know, The Exorcist and stuff like that, then you have to see the performances in this movie. So go ahead with, we're talking about Mina Harker now.
Yes. So now we come to Mina Harker. Dracula's obsession with Mina Harker stems from her image as a pure Victorian woman compared to the modern woman of the time, Lucy. Now, this does go into the more uncomfortable areas of Bram Stoker and his view of women and sexuality. Mina Harker represents the ideal pure Victorian woman. Her and Jonathan Harker are newlyweds. They're each other's one and only, whereas Lucy is presented as the more modern woman of the time. She is courting 3 men. And what happens? Well, the woman who is seeing many men is lost to Dracula, whereas the pure virgin type Mina is the one who's preserved and saved at the end. And there have been commentary on Bram Stoker's own sexuality. Some have said he might have been a closeted homosexual. It's very obvious reading Dracula. One of my biggest critiques of his writing is Lucy is very much a pick-me. The way she talks about, oh, men, and how much stronger and smarter and all that. And I have to tell myself, I'm like, well, this is a guy writing a woman, so
I feel like it's a lot of Puritanism. Like, it's just a lot of people thought that way in that time. So it's like the women are these things that the men cherish. And there's a lot of virtue. Like, the characters are commenting on each other's virtue and goodness. And you can see by the things that they praise each other for what the societal values of the author are. And so, yes, it's the idea is like, the women are kept aside in safety, and the chivalrous men do all the dirty work for them and stuff. And this is intentionally what's changed about Nosferatu. You've got a long list of the differences and stuff, but the very first thing you notice about the Nosferatu version of the story is the female characters are more interesting and empowered, and they are no longer, potted plants of various kinds, but they are actually driving the story. So that is very intentionally something that evolved as the times evolved and further authors took control of the story, and all the way to the point where Eggers has really taken this all the way to its conclusion, to where what's Lily Rose Depp's character's name again?
Ellen Hutter.
Ellen is like very clearly the center of the story, so there's a lot to be said about the way that no one listens to her and everyone labels, and this is true in the original Nosferatu too, like she's labeled as hysterical and all this stuff, which is basically women outside of the box. They put her in the corset. This is a very obvious symbol of constraint and like you got to fit into the form of society. And there's these different women in the both stories to sort of show you the ones that are conforming and the ones that are not. And there's obviously a lot of this stuff, especially in Nosferatu and Eggers' version, is about repression. In this Victorian repression, repressing the dark side, repressing your shadow, repressing the id until it comes bubbling up out of the sewers. What's your take on some of that? But I definitely see that as an evolving conversation between like the original version and subsequent versions.
Yeah, because Bram Stoker writing this in the time he did in this Victorian era, and then he's incorporating all these different taboos into the story because it's a story of sex and violence, of death, and also when it comes to the vampire and the undead, there's also the uncomfortable tidbits of necrophilia that also goes in this. And we see that like when they unearth Lucy and we realize Lucy is a vampire, this blue woman that's been leading children astray. There's commentary on how beautiful her corpse look. It's very uncomfortable. And then what happens is then the three men that she had been courting then have to each take turns pounding a stake through her because subtext. It's very much like this repressed sexuality. And plus there's Bram Stoker. At the time, too, syphilis was also a big thing going on. It's said that Bram Stoker may have actually suffered from syphilis himself. And then that in turn goes into the film adaptation, too, because 1992's film adaptation was going on during the height of the AIDS epidemic when we were learning more about HIV. And so all of the talk of blood transfer and sex and stuff like that, you can see like a product of its time, the commentary that was being made on these very real diseases that were plaguing the nations at these times, and both the author's commentary on it, but also just the uncomfortableness that they felt around it and some of the repression. And this becomes a way of like trying to talk about it without hanging too much of a lampshade on it.
I also think that I always think about the metaphors and stuff, and as the story goes on and is in the hands of further people, the metaphor of Dracula really becomes the idea of seductive evil. It's like things that are ultimately will destroy you, but are still seductive and beautiful. And so you lust after them, but you're also signing your name on your own death warrant. So these are basically, it's vice. Right, whatever vice you want to talk about, but that's definitely a common thing to write about, and I think it's an unavoidable layer of this when you're talking about being attracted to these dead things. And there's a lot of characters we're going to talk about, like Renfield, who want to become vampires, and so they are lusting after this dark power. So it's the same. It's two different versions of the same idea, which is again just lusting after these dark powers that ultimately will doom yourself. And I know we're jumping around here, but the Nosferatu ending, that's how they beat the vampires. They played his own greed against him. They're like, well, if you just give him what he wants, he'll just feed on it to the point of killing himself. And so it's the whole scorpion and the frog, they're crossing the river, and the scorpion stings the frog. It's like, why did you do that? Because it's my nature. Maybe it's a turtle. I forget, but you guys know, hopefully, the thing I'm trying to refer to.
But so we were at, so the obsession with Mina. The obsession, it's not love is the point. It's not love for Mina, but power over her that drives Dracula's interest. And we can compare this to Euron and his view of Dany. It's not love that's sending Euron after Dany. It's not love that's having Euron send Victarion out to go fetch her for him. It's what she can bring to him. Dragons. It's the throne. That is what he's here. Like Dany is a means to an end. And so if Euron can exert power over her, make her his bride when the Kraken weds the dragon, then all the world will tremble, I believe is the line. And that corresponds then to Dany herself. I have the line at the end of the Orlok thing, but there is where Dany is in bed with Hisdar, but she sees what potentially is Euron. Bruised lips, his manhood felt like ice. It's like Euron invading her dreams while she's having sex with Hisdar. And we get sort of, it's not in the original Nosferatu because of obvious reasons, but in the new Nosferatu, there is a sex scene in which Ellen feels the presence of Orlok in the distance.
Yep. There's some pretty disturbing, but really artistically done stuff in the new one. And from it seems like most of the stuff he's adding in versus the original one is either sort of drawing from the wider Dracula milieu of stories, or he's taken stuff that's implied in Nosferatu and sort of just exploring it further. So I really enjoyed the new version. I just thought it was incredible. Yeah, the shadow hand, that was incredible. So let me jump here. Oh no, we've got a little more of the story. So
yeah. So
we talked about how they hypnotize Mina and are able to track Dracula because of that. So again, turning the monster's strengths against him. And George really copies that too in Fever Dream and other stories. He's kind of always telling you, like, don't just go right at the big bad guy. Like, you need to figure out the strategy, Let's just.
But so one of the things I thought of was, so when Dracula feeds from Mina and then he forces her to drink his own blood, and that the consumption of one another's blood is what creates the link between the two. And that's what allows Dracula to spy on Abraham Van Helsing, the hunting party, which of course Abraham will then use to his advantage and use Dracula's psychic link against him. But it made me think, like, one of the other potential reasons for Euron sending Vic out to go meet Dany is not just to steal a dragon and blow a dragon horn, but it also might be to establish a connection with Dany. And that made me think, when Quaithe grabs Dany's arm and she feels like that tingling sensation, because we don't know how a glass candle works, but I could presume that in order to spy on someone with a glass candle, you need their phone number, is how I would look at it. So Vic's goal might just be to make contact with Dany so that Euron can begin truly spying on her, establish a connection to Dany the way Dracula forces a connection through Mina.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that Euron has a glass candle. That's the Urathon Nightwalker thing. But even that name, Nightwalker, like that's a vampire word. Daywalker is the vampire that can walk during the day. Like, Nightwalkers are what they usually are. So Urathon Nightwalker using a glass candle, and what he's doing with the glass candles, he's projecting his shadow out across the world, and he's looking at things, and that's why, like, Mokoro can see him as the one eye and 10 black shadowy arms reaching out, over everything. Euron can be seen because he's active, because his shadowy hand is out there. So it's very Dracula-like in that sense.
Because I was just thinking, though, but like, since we don't know exactly how a glass candle works, what are its? Does a glass candle allow you to see anything and everything anywhere, or do you have to have some kind? Because that sounds like if you could just spy anywhere and see everything that's going on at any point, that seems like too much for George's more low magic thing. Seems more like
there's
a glass
probably
candle.
limits. There's probably limits. Yeah, and I agree with that. The Quaithe touch is to make it for an easy link. Yeah, that does make sense.
Establishing a link. Um, but yeah, so we come to our climax of our story. So the strength becomes a weakness. Hypnotizing Mina, Van Helsing is able to track Dracula. I back traced it, and this is when when Dracula realizes, like, oh crap, I can see them, but they can see me. That's when he has his flight back to Romania. Uh, and this again, a violent storm is conjured during this, heavily implied that Dracula is the one doing it, that he brings the storm as a means of trying to flee, of trying to scatter them to the wind. So we have like our party has to, let's the Scooby-Doo let's split up gang, going all different kinds of ways before all congregating on Dracula's castle. The storm symbolizes the dark nature and the chaos and desperation is escape. And then when they do reach his castle, the final trek is accompanied by heavy snowfall. So when we reach, like, if you're on the natural progression of after the storm, if he becomes a Night's King figure, then it's not just a storm and lightning and thunder and rain it's bringing, then it becomes snow. So that is and we can see symbolism that in the final trek to the castle, when it starts heavily snowing and you hear wolves howling in the distance.
And I just want to say that the Starks, even though we talked more about the Boltons, the Starks have, I almost want to say, like vampire hunter vibes because of all the silver that they have on everything and because they oppose the Boltons. But they do live in the Gothic castles that are basically all centered around the crypts. And yeah, they are like the wolves. So, I don't know. The Starks, of course, the Starks Night King may have been a Stark, as they say. Mm-hmm. So,
and then the death scene. So this could be the death scene of Dracula. Could be, depending on how George wants to go, depending on how much exactly he wants to borrow from the story and tweak to his own design, could give us some massive foreshadowing for the end of our own story, like the ending of Euron's downfall. From her vantage point, Mina sees Dracula's hateful expression turn to a look of triumph. At that moment, however, Jonathan Harker slashes through Dracula's throat just as Quincy Morris plunges his knife into the Count's heart. Dracula dies, and as his body crumbles to dust, Mina notes in his face a look of peace, such as I never could have imagined might have rested there. And then, but Quincy Morris is fatally wounded because it seems like I don't see everyone, all of our heroes, making it to the end. That's why I got to include the death of Quincy Morris. Probably symbolizes that someone important in the fight against Euron, in the war against the Nightwalkers, someone important's probably going to go down at the end. Not everyone's going to come out of this unscathed.
So that is the summary of the Dracula story and some of the references. But obviously we're going to keep referring to this as we go through some of this other stuff. So, Tim, when we're talking about like the role of the vampire and the creation of the vampire archetype, one of the obvious things here is the fact that this is a kind of Antichrist, like literally the reverse image almost of the Christ. And Jacob Oswald, you're quite welcome, and you're quite welcome.
Oh yeah, do we want to catch super chats too? We should probably.
Yeah, I've been there's only been a couple. I caught them both, I think.
Okay.
Let me just double check. Yep.
Yeah, we comment.
That's the standard Ion super chat there. And yeah, got these. Okay, so this is really super obvious, but it just still needs to be pointed out so you can sort of notice it. Jesus Christ pours out his blood to save mankind, while the vampire drinks blood to possess people in bondage. Okay? Mm-hmm. The church is called the Bride of Christ, and not creepy at all. And the church is made up of the people saved by his blood. So his bride is all the people he's saving. The bride of Dracula is the person that Dracula feeds on. So it's a total inversion. And that's partly where they get this idea of like who's the bride of Satan. It's like those who worship the devil and give themselves to the devil, just as the church is the bride of Christ. So Jesus' blood brings freedom from damnation, whereas the vampires drinking your blood damns you to eternal servitude. Okay. Jesus is resurrected in a new heavenly body and promises the same to his followers. Whereas a vampire is resurrected in his own dead body, and he's all corpse-like and promises similar things to his followers. So Jesus also comes down to the earthly realm from the heavens to sort of save everyone. And there's always this important journey of Dracula to his home, from his home in the place beyond the forest, Transylvania, coming to the city, the nice civilized place, to do his evil. Jesus even has his disciples drink his blood at the last cent. Exactly. So, but instead of it's different though, because Jesus, as usually the head vampire, drinks other people's blood to bond them to him. Okay. But here, and sometimes he'll let them drink from his too. But the whole point with Jesus is that he's sacrificing. He's only giving and pouring out to save people. But you can see how they took the Last Supper, and made it a dark, twisted version of it. Exactly. Yes, Jesus is a zombie. And then, of course, Jesus teaches his followers to evangelize and make more Christians. And, the vampires are always converting people like a plague, but without consent. And then Jesus is called the light of the world, whereas a vampire is a shadow that casts a shadow over the world. So it's pretty obvious stuff. And then again, the other thing about it is, and this is kind of why the cross is an anathema to the vampire, because the vampire is created as an antichrist. So that kind of makes more sense now. And then when you think of Ellen's sacrifice at the end of Nosferatu, it's an obvious correlation to Jesus' sacrifice, letting death beat him. But it's like, oh, by beating me, you have only made me stronger. It's the Obi-Wan trick, essentially. You're letting death win for a moment, because death doesn't realize that the way that you have engineered the win actually turns it into a loss, because it's the self-sacrifice. Obi-Wan knows he'll be a Force ghost that can help Luke. And then he's helped them escape. And similarly, Ellen knows that she is essentially saving everyone by tricking the vampire into feeding on her until the sun comes up. So a lot of Christ parallels there.
Yeah. But I just want to say, Jesus is more than just a zombie, okay? Jesus is a lich. Show some respect.
Yeah, show some respect. So then, I
guess we want to... Did you have more?
Well, no, that's it for the vampires, but I think I want to talk about the weirwoods here, because this is more Dracula-centric than Nosferatu's. The Nosferatu stuff is going to lead us to talk about Nissa Nissa and some other things, but just to mix in a little ice and fire, Tim, let's talk about the weirwoods real quick, and then we'll get into the Nosferatu. So they are vampire trees. Like, let's be clear. Not only do they drink blood and have bloody mouths, literally people sacrifice people to them. And their appearance matches that of Dracula. In the Bram Stoker Dracula, the coloring is emphasized over and over and over again. Pale, corpse white flesh, blood red lips, very rich blood red lips, and then the eyes, burn. They burn red when he gets intense and he gets this Dracula on. So we have the weirwood trees, corpse white, and everything else is bloody. So it's very vampiric. And then probably the best way to say this is that the only blood in a vampire is the blood that they drink from other people. And the weirwoods, instead of sap, have blood. But where does that blood come from? Not from the tree. It's from all the people sacrificed to them. And we know that Bran, sitting in the roots, can taste the blood entering the Winterfell heart tree pond. So this old tradition of feeding the trees blood, they're vampire trees. The only blood inside of them is the blood of those they drink. So, they're very weirwood-like. And they're found in atop graveyards in Gothic castles, which is where vampires live
Mhm.
in Gothic castles and specifically in graveyards.
Yeah.
The children and other sacrifices are brought to the vampire trees, at White Tree in particular. So, yeah, the blood drinking tree is serviced by its victims. Like, I noticed that's kind of like vampire compulsion. And then the last thing I would say is kind of just like a question. So, like, what does that mean? What does this say about the weirwood trees and how they are vampires? Like, I thought, since I have this whole idea about, well, they didn't used to be that way, and Crowfoot's daughter, shout out to her, same page. They used to be green weirwoods, and then they were bloodied, and they had their green men ripped out of them, and so they are like dead and zombified white trees, WIGHT. It's kind of like the green heart of the planet was bitten by Azor Ahai the vampire, or by the black meteor, if you want to say. And having been bitten, the whole earth is like been converted into a vampire. So now the world tree that should be this symbol of the green vitality of the planet, now it's been bitten. It's been converted. So now it's a vampire. It didn't used to be that way. But yeah, because when you think about the fact that the weirwood roots go all the way down, well, we don't know how far down, but seemingly very far down into the earth and may all be physically connected, that kind of makes the earth itself like a big weirwood organism. And that organism itself got bit and converted into a vampire.
Yeah. The world is a vampire.
That's it.
But, yeah, I do want to reference, because actually, your latest video, the on Naga, where you brought up, so there's that Ironborn myth about the flesh-eating tree that the Grey King slew, Yig, and you had said, like, because 70% of the weirwoods is derived from Yggdrasil, the world tree. And then I would throw in, and the other 30% is the fungi of Yuggoth from Lovecraft, this invasive species. And then, of course, there's that giant, I'm blanking on the name, but that giant mushroom organism in Oregon that's like, it's like the world's biggest single living organism is a fungi network. And we've talked many times, like, the weirwoods operate like a fungi. It's like like we said, well, we love hybrids, and the weirwoods are like a hybrid of fungus and a tree. It has traits of both.
Yeah, so it's kind of like if the weirwoods were here but in a different state and got transformed, then the invasive element is the thing that transformed them, not the trees themselves. So the trees look like fungi and operate like fungi, and that's to get us to think about invasive species. But it would be the thing that entered the weirwood net, Azor Ahai and his sort of physical parallel of the black meteor from space. These are the things that come in and poison everything. So
it's like, take Yggdrasil, the world tree, but rather than being a net benefit to the earth, it's actually a vampire. It's leeching off of the earth, feeding from it, not supporting it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it, honestly, is that, like, yeah, the world tree got bitten by Azor the vampire, and now it is
and Yggdrasil has the Nidhogg. I always forget the name of that damn dragon gnawing on the roots.
Nidhogger,
thank you.
Nidhogger. Yeah,
so Yggdrasil is being bitten as we speak.
So it's just another creepy aspect to it. Like, the weirwoods are terrifying because they are vampire trees, but they themselves may have been bitten and transformed in an unnatural way. And we essentially need to undo that somehow. So put garlic in the mouth of the weirwoods? I'm not sure. We'll have to see. But okay, so let's go. You have this bit about blood and vampires too. So let's talk about that before we go to Nosferatu.
Yeah, so I started off with blood quotes. Blood is life, the blood is life. That is Herr Nox screaming in madness during Nosferatu. All Valyrian sorcery is rooted in blood or fire. For all of you who I see you in the chat mentioning Helsing and the Bird of Hermes. So yes, I have a quote. If you want to scroll up to these quotes, I do have one from Helsing from Kodo Hirano. Blood is the currency of the soul, the vehicle of life. Blood is the medium in which life can be transferred. Having blood offered is a very different experience than taking it. Now, I can't say for certain whether or not Gurm has read Helsing, but he definitely adapted the same concept that Hirano did when he did his story of Helsing, and making a story of Abraham Van Helsing's descendants. And then we have a bunch of Bible quotes. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. That's Leviticus. Be sure not to eat the blood, because the blood is the life, and you must not eat the life with the meat. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace. And then, of course, there is the big one, which we were talking about, Jesus and his followers, the Last Supper. Jesus took bread, and then he had given thanks. He broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many of the forgiveness of your souls. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. And like you said, Jesus is not taking any of this for himself. He is offering up his own blood and receiving nothing in return. It is all a net benefit for his followers.
And what's interesting is that the folkloric, like the whole story of Jesus and why it works for him to be this sacrifice, is because of hundreds and thousands of years of folkloric belief that blood sacrifice works. You can see it in the Old Testament with Jacob and Isaac. I kind of did once wonder why George has so much blood magic in his story. I was like, is he into voodoo or like just the occult, or what is this? But I think a lot of it is vampire inspired, and / Christian inspired, and vampirism obviously being inspired by Christian ideas as well. I think that really is, you can see it in these verses. Like, a lot of people believe that the blood is where the vitality and the life and the power is. So we talk about Vermeer eating the heart of his master Hagen after he kills him. That's obviously that kind of stuff. And that's really what it seems like. Like, blood is this currency or mana that can power magic spells, whether it's you're doing ice magic or fire magic or any other kind of magic. The blood can power it. So this is why it's sort of, it's a very Christian idea. It's a very vampire friendly idea. So I think that's a good context for it.
So that is followed up with the blood and vampire section, and this is written out as, if you want to scroll down to the next section. This was very much just a stream of consciousness on my part, but this was the emphasis for why I wanted to do this stream, because I had seen Nosferatu and I had made all these connections, and I'd gone back and I'd looked at the quotes and all the biblical quotes, and then I also remembered that line from Helsing about blood is the currency of the soul, and that's when I had like this huge eureka moment, and I'm like, we got to do this. So in vampire lore, the drinking of blood on the physical aspect is because it is considered their primary source of life. Necessary to stay in their undead state, blood is what keeps them functioning and allows them to exist, because they are unable to obtain nourishment from regular food sources like humans do. That is why do vampires drink blood? That is the answer to the physical need for it. But symbolically, because that's the thing here, we're all about the symbolism of the vampire, of why the vampire drinks blood, why it needs to consume blood, is blood representing the loss of life and the loss of the soul within the vampire. Taken from that, both the blood is the currency quote and the blood is the life quote that we saw in all the biblical scripture, and just as Hair Knox screams in Nosferatu. So if blood is the currency of the soul, if blood represents the life, blood represents the soul, then for the vampires, drinking the blood is an effort to reclaim the thing that was lost. Orlok and Dracula, their transformation into vampires, into original OG vampires, comes at the cost of their humanity and their souls. Bram Stoker's novel, Cam Dracula, becomes a vampire through an unspecified supernatural event, likely involving a curse or a deal with a demonic entity. We went over the Sholanod and all that. Orlok, he becomes a vampire through a deal with Belial, the lieutenant demon of Satan. So in response to this loss of their soul, selling their soul to obtain this higher feat of power, feeding on blood becomes a futile attempt to reclaim what was once lost. If blood is life, then the vampire is not, and the currency of the soul, then the vampire is not only lifeless, but bankrupt. They are denied atonement upon the altar in the Old Testament. They are denied the covenant with Jesus Christ in the New Testament. They are denied access to the kingdom of heaven. They are denied absolution, denied absolvement of sin, denied the right to an afterlife in God's good graces because of the cost that they paid to do this. So George's use of blood magic, of why blood is such a key component, follows the tradition of blood as life, blood as soul, and blood as currency to purchase this kind of power. While we hear power in a king's blood, it seems that more powerful magic is gained from a willing sacrifice. Story of Nissa Nissa. It was Nissa Nissa's sacrifice that allowed for Lightbringer to be created and made it the sword that to end the long night. So this is like a quality versus quantity situation, separating characters who would make that kind of noble sacrifice. Your Danny figures, your John figures, possibly Nissa Nissa, if we accept the story as written, versus the quantity of those who are willing to willingly and flagrantly spill blood, like Euron, like the Bloodstone Emperor, again, like Azor Ahai, if it was not a noble sacrifice on Nissa's part, but if it was instead outright murder. You're muted.
Well, I've got more to say about that. Let's actually go there now, since you bring it up. It's on the end of the White Walker stream here, or notes rather. So, okay, I talked about the villain and the hero archetype. But okay. Actually, no. I want to bring this up after Nosferatu, because I've got the Nosferatu ending might be an inspiration for certain endings about John and Danny that we've talked about. So let's actually go back to the Nosferatu notes. And here. Here. Yeah, almost here. Right here. Okay.
I was very thorough, if you couldn't tell when I wrote this.
Well, we've already leaked out a lot of this stuff, so I mean, what's the important part of what we want to say? Obviously, there's the certain historical trivia. Nosferatu is made in 1922. They don't have the rights to Dracula, so they changed some of the names. Later, Bram Stoker's wife sues them, and they have to destroy all the copies, but fortunately they didn't. And, that survived, and it's now a classic. And it's similar in the original plot beats, but the ending, as we've already discussed, is very different, and some of the themes end up being different because of that. But one thing that we keyed in on, Tim, when we were discussing this, is the time, 1922. It's the beginning of the Roaring Twenties, and it's all this, there's a lot of like materialism going on, which makes the whole theme of greed interesting. But the thing that you uncovered that's really interesting is that, so we started off talking about World War I and how that was basically going on in the 19-teens. So so Nosferatu, it's being written shortly on the heels of World War I, and both Max Schreck and the person who wrote, I don't know if it's the director or the writer, but one of those two also
Brown
served, and everybody's lives was really affected by the war. So that's I think something to take in consideration. All this like descending into darkness, going to a strange foreign land where like everything is horrific. This is an experience a lot of people would have related to. And even Ellen's sacrifice at the end, where she's like kind of descending into darkness. She's giving herself to the monster, but keeping people safe, keeping everyone else safe. This is something I think all of the soldiers would have been able to relate to. They went into absolute hell in the trenches and all these places. And then essentially they're like, I might not get out of here. And even if I do, it might not ever be the same. However, I'm keeping people safe back home. So there's a lot of, I think that self-sacrifice idea would have resonated strongly with people at the time.
Yeah. So, yeah. So Nosferatu, Symphony of Horror. Yeah. Silent German expressionist film made in 1922. German film. This is during the Weimar years. We're 4 years after the end of World War I, and all of the blame has been placed on Germany. The image of Count Orlok was designed by Albin Brau. He was a producer for the film. He's the one who came up with Orlok's design, and he based it. The appearance is based off of corpses he saw while serving on the Serbian front. And then Max Schreck, the German actor who played Count Orlok, he also fought in the war. He was in the trenches, and it said he might have developed PTSD. During the filming, he had a habit of quietly walking off set and going for long walks alone in the forest. He also once stated that he lived in a remote and incorporeal world. So it seems like he really kind of got sucked into the character that he was playing when he did this. A mix of PTSD and method acting. So Count Orlok embodies the living corpse image of vampires in Eastern European folklore, in comparison to the handsome and charming Dracula. Orlok is also nicknamed the Bird of Death, which, more Euron connections. Euron is the crow's eye. The crow is a carrion bird. Again, like you already noted, it was originally meant to be an adaptation, but they couldn't get the rights. Bram Stoker's widow refused to sell. So instead, F.W. Murnau was just like, fine, I'll make my own Dracula movie. I'm just going to change some names and places. And this is where we get Count Dracula's Orlok, Jonathan Harker, Thomas Hutter, Mina Harker, Ellen Hutter, Renfield becomes Herr Nock, Abraham Van Helsing becomes Albin Eberhard von Franz. In the original, he's simply known as Dr. Bulwer. In the new movie, he's named Albin Eberhard von Franz, and that is in tribute to Albin Bra.
Okay, hang on a second. You're going really fast. I need you to take a breath sometime so I can get in here. Breathe, Tim. Remember to breathe. So the chat is filling in some interesting stuff here, not me, really. Orlok is the bird of death. Helsing means bird of Hermes.
Yes, the bird of Hermes is my name, eating my wings to make me tame. That is
similar idea.
It's an alchemical prophecy. The bird of Hermes represents the vapors coming off of a forged philosopher's stone. In Helsing, the bird of Hermes eating its wings to make it tame refers to Alucard locking away his own power in order to maintain some kind of form. That is why when Alucard releases his powers, he's releasing his restrictions. And when he goes to level 0, he is releasing all of the souls that he has consumed over the centuries.
And so Brienne's fat sister mentions the Spanish flu had just happened as well. So this is part of the whole pandemic and plague themes that are going on. But all right. So yeah, the names are changed, but the archetypes are easy to identify. They're, This is probably a good example of how archetypes work. You could change the name, but the character is doing the same actions, so it's the same character, more or less. Just different versions of it. Yeah. So we already talked about the Demeter and Persephone thing.
But in Nosferatu, it becomes the name of the ship is the Impusa, which is a monster from Greek myth. That a Daemon resembling a Lamia, which is a half human, half snake.
Interesting. So Renfield, this is a great character. Like I said, he's the alt John the Baptist. If Dracula is the Antichrist, John the Baptist, of course, preaches before the coming of Christ and paves the way and all that stuff. And so then we have Renfield.
Mm-hmm. So
Very interesting element to the story. The story wouldn't be the same without him, and the same that Lord of the Rings isn't the same without Gollum.
Yeah, so all three of the stories that we're talking about have a So Dracula has Renfield, Nosferatu has Harnock, and in Fever Dream, our villain Damon Julian has Sour Billy Tipton. These are the human familiars, and they are the guys who are performing this service because they've been promised something, usually promised that they will be made vampires themselves and they'll get to enjoy vampiric powers. The point of the human familiar is to perform all of the things for a vampire that's necessary for a vampire that they can't perform themselves during the day. So Nock is a familiar in service to Count Orlok, just as Renfield is Count Dracula, and Billy Tipton. Hare, Nock, and Renfield, they consume insects, birds, and small animals in a mock portrayal of their vampiric overlords because they believe that blood is the source of life. Same thing happens will happen in Fever Dream when Damon Julian's telling Billy, well, you can start by, consuming the blood of animals, but eventually you're going to have to work your way towards humans. Both
and
are
real
fanatical.
quick, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power did this, and I think they were copying something from the Silmarillion, where Sauron is destroyed and slowly reconstitutes himself by eating the tiniest little bugs and then eating bigger things and getting bigger and bigger. I think that might be, is that a Lovecraftian thing too?
Possibly, I'm not, because that's something I've seen in a number of like sci-fi and horror stories, is something growing exponentially bigger, starting consuming small, but then getting big.
Yeah, I've got those vibes from Renfield.
Yeah. I also remember an episode of Megas XLR where they did that, and that is a completely different kind of story. But I think that's the consumption of small and then going big until it eventually reaches just humongous proportions is an idea that's been done in many different mediums. But anyway, back to Renfield. So they're both confined to insane asylums for their zoophilic tendencies, eating animals and birds. In fact, Renfield in Dracula, Renfield actually requests that he be given a kitten or a cat, and they're like, well, no, we see what you're doing to the birds, like we know what you're going to do to the cat if we give you one. Both can escape their confinements in an effort to warn their masters, and they both serve as secondary villains, the human villains to the primary antagonist vampires. And then again, Billy Tipton is our secondary villain of Fever Dream.
And in my opinion, this might be one of the most important characters to think about in these stories, because this really gives away what it's about. Like I said, when you've got this thing with the people being sort of seduced by the vampires and eaten by them, that's one thing. But these freaking people, the ones that watch the vampires and see what they do and want to be like them, they're literally the worst people, because they are fully aware of what they're trying to get into. They're trying to get into the most evil, predatory way of getting power as possible. And you see Varamir Sixskins is a great example of this,
And Craster.
Yeah. And just honestly, all the High Lords playing the Game of Thrones, using their children as pawns in order to do things, like you're going down that road. And this is the whole point of creating an over-the-top evil parallel and personification of something that exists in the real world, is to make it easier to notice by making it disturbing. The point of making the sex scenes between Orlok and Ellen disturbing is because it's the things it represents are supposed to be disturbing. It is drawing out, like, the vampire he'll eat little children and women and whoever, like men. He doesn't care. He is an appetite. It's this consumption, and it's just showing you, like, if you are greedy and you're pursuing profit, if you want to be a healthcare CEO, and you gotta deny those sick people healthcare. You can't stop and cry about it. You can't feel sorry for grandma. Sorry, grandma. We got, big stock options to fatten. So, like, this is the thing. It's like the evil, and even in the way that like, no one understands how Dracula was stopped in Nosferatu. And again, getting into Eggers making this more obvious. Like, we have one woman in a bedroom solving the whole problem by herself, and everyone else is like, oh, we can go back to normal now, isn't that great? So no one really appreciates like the price that was paid in quiet by this person. And so there's a lot of things to get into, but yeah, I think when the main theme of the story is greed, you have to think about the greedy people in society and sort of just map all this onto that. And you can see, oh yeah, all kinds of people suffer. You don't even hear about all the price that is paid for people to amass these great fortunes. So,
yeah. And that touches upon something we covered in the Ironborn heraldry stream we did when when I brought up who declared for who. Look at Euron's early declarants. It's the worst of the worst among Ironborn houses. It's always like it's people like the Cods, or it's the ones with the most monstrous of sigils, the Salt Cliffs. So they're the Hydra, the Orkmonts. So their name. Who's declaring for Euron? It's the Hydras, the Orcs, the Cods, like the Wenches. All of the death and monstrous and seedy families are the ones that declare for Euron first, and then the rest then follow later, either by being charmed by Euron, or being forced by Euron, or just being outright killed by Euron.
Yeah, Euron is definitely seducing the Ironborn with, glory and riches and things like that. And that's the whole point of the Game of Thrones. I mean, that's what George was talking about with the whole damn thing. So
yeah, but it's like left-hand Lucas Cod may as well be an Ironborn Renfield.
And then the other thing about the Renfield characters is that they serve very well in a sort of story function purpose. Like, they're giving you clues about Dracula that you don't realize are clues about Dracula at first, right? Like, he's just showing you the principle of life energy and feeding on life energy. Life feeds on life. Shout out to Tool fans with the secret song. But yes, that consumption of feeding on things. The principles of Dracula are being explained by Renfield. And eventually you realize, oh, there's a direct connection, and Renfield is in fact his agent. But it's just a way, like, kind of like with the others. The others, you don't get to see them directly, and so George has to feed us clues about the others in other ways. And that's the whole thing with Dracula. It's like these side characters serve as a device, literally a plot device, to give us more information about what's going on. And it's kind of a sneaky way to do it. So a cool... and then from the other really cool character like that is the Vampire Hunter character, the Van Helsing character. We mentioned that already, but like, obviously this is a character that's an archetype. It's like the person who's willing to go and look the devil in the eye, and laugh at him and try to, come out up with the upper hand. So that's always a fun character.
So we got our similarities, because again, the first half of Nosferatu, pretty much beat for beat, is a repeat of Dracula. Just names and places change. Tom Hutter, John Harker, both solicitors, both go to a castle in Transylvania to sell property to a count. They both... Okay,
we already basically said all this.
All of this, yeah. Everything is the same. They both cut themselves. The count responds drinking their blood. This becomes like really... It gets to the point where it's like, seriously, dude, put things together. Like, no one could be this dense. Get the hell out of this castle. But by that point, it's too late. They're both in prison. They both have their flight from the castle and are chased by wolves. Meanwhile, the count is leaving on boat to their destination. Both pick off the crewmen, yada, yada, yada. Here's where we get to the differences. And that is mostly with the character Ellen. Because unlike Mina Harker, who doesn't really take a proactive stance until the last half of the novel, after Dracula has made a psychic link with her, Ellen Hutter is proactive from the start, because she is, even before Orlok even enters the picture, she's already spiritually aware. Even before Thomas leaves for the Carpathian Mountains, she's already has like this premonition, this bad feeling begging him, like, not like, don't go, it's not worth it. I know something, I don't know what, but something bad is going to happen. I feel it in my gut.
And that's why Eggers introduces this element of her having been contacted by Orlok in the past, because he probably felt like this needed to be explained. Like, why does she have a connection to him? I saw some analysis talking about how, like, part of the reason why she's susceptible to him and why he chooses her is because she is an outsider like him, in a way, in the sense that, like, nobody listens to her. Nobody, like, even her husband doesn't understand what she wants. Everyone thinks she's crazy. And women who are more passionate in general and less controlled are seen scornfully. So there is this link of outsiderness that potentially ties them together. And I think that gets back into the idea that, like, the societal repression of so much, not just women, but, like, repression of just all kinds of things. It's that Victorian Puritanism type of stuff. And when you repress your shadow, it comes out in weird ways. Here we have a woman who's more comfortable with her shadow, and it's very disturbing to everyone else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is why, like, I wanted to put the focus on the original Nosferatu, because obviously a movie that just came out this past December isn't going to play a role in A Song of Ice and Fire, but the original story, which has been out for over a century now, definitely has. But as we've been talking about things that are a product of their time, part of the limitation in Nosferatu and why Eggers had to expand more upon this is, first of all, Nosferatu is a foreign film. It's German. Second, most of the copies were destroyed. We're lucky that we have them. So we're translating a foreign film. So third, then it being a silent film, aside from the occasional title card, no dialogue. So everything has to be inferred to us through acting, through the mannerisms and the facial expressions. But then it's also in black and white. So a lot of things can get lost in translation. That's why I'm very appreciative of Eggers for, like, really expanding on the lore and making Ellen more of a putting more meat on the bones of Ellen's character. But even in the original Nosferatu, Ellen is still distinct from Mina in that she, from the very, very get-go, is playing an active role in this. And she isn't like a wilting flower, just cough on her and she's going to faint, like the type of, like, what Mina Harker is.
And that's really what makes it interesting, and what is more influential to the genre going forward is this attraction and pairing between the woman and the vampire, and the different ways you can use it. It's kind of a flexible metaphor. You can use it to say different things based on what you're sort of having them each represent. But yeah, the reason why I mentioned all this stuff is because George is using that in Ice and Fire. We see that all the time. Powerful women who are slightly unusual, or especially ones that are from a foreign land, they're all called witches, and all manner of stuff is said about them. Some of them may be witches. There are witches in the story, but we've seen that this is a weapon used by the maesters and ignorant people and septons and things, just reflecting their ignorance or as a control mechanism. So this is exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about in the Nosferatu version of Ellen, where everyone's terrified. The sleepwalking, okay? Mm-hmm. Sleepwalking classically during this time was looked at as basically like shamanism. Like, the people who sleptwalked, they had one foot in the spirit world, and they were more susceptible to psychic things and all that stuff. So the treatment of Ellen is very much like the way that, strange women are called witches because they're too threatening. It's the same train of thought and culture, same time period, and George, like I said, using that in his story. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, Ellen is more proactive than Mina. In fact, in the original Nosferatu, it's actually Ellen is the one who discovers the Book of Vampires, and she's the one who's like starts coming up with the means of defeating Orlok. Whereas in the remake, they changed it to von Franz being the one who discovers it, and that's because they're changing up the original Dr. Bull, where two more who played less prominent in the original film, and making him more of this theatrical Van Helsing type character in the new movie. But yeah,
they swapped that out for Ellen's connection to Orlok that goes back further, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, because they want to flesh out both characters and give them both something to do. But yeah, it's important to note that in the original, yeah, Ellen's the one who discovers the book. Um, so Count Orlok brings plague to Visborg while Dracula brings a storm. Now, a fog does roll in, but with Nosferatu, the emphasis is more on the plague rats that are coming with him when he gets to Visborg. So that's like less of a Euron thing, but we are seeing elements of that in Marine, where plague is showing up with a pale rider.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with John Con and King's Landing too, if George dips back into that symbolism or not.
Yeah. And the big thing here is, yeah, Ellen willingly allows the Count to feed from her while Mina is forced. Mina Harker is saved by her husband and the party members, while Thomas Hutter is unable to save Ellen. That is because she finds only a woman can break his frightful spell, a woman pure in heart who will offer her blood freely. In the new movie, they change it to the more poetic, of the maiden and the beast, but still same concept. They just flowered up the language a bit. But it's Ellen's sacrifice that keeps Orlok with her. He feeds on her throughout the night until the sun rises, and his transfixion on her is what causes him to like lose track of time, and so the sun rises and kills him.
And so this is where we get to the Nissa Nissa stuff. You put it in here. I was in both of our notes. It's just so obvious, like, you know, it's a like I said, the Azor Ahai legend is vampiric. It's her seed and soul going into the blade, and then into, like you said, the blood is a medium. Everything else rides on it. It's her strength and her spirit and her soul and her courage. It all goes with the blood. So she is giving herself into this vampiric act, and it even my reading of it, which is like she's a weirwood maiden, and Azor Ahai's goal is to try to force his way into the weirwood net. He's using the blood magic sacrifice of basically an elf queen to get into the tree. That has the effect of burning it or bleeding it or whatever. And the thing is that we think that there's this second act where Nissa Nissa becomes Night's Queen, potentially. And now she has the upper hand. It's like Azor Ahai kills her outside of the weirwood net, but once they're inside of the weirwood net, well, now we're on Nissa Nissa's turf. Because Azor Ahai, he didn't realize, but he's got to die to get in there. And so now they're both in there, or maybe Azor is half alive and weirwooded up, who knows. But the point is, we're reading this all through parallels. And there's a lot of parallels where the Night's Queen figure seems to be turning the tables on Night's King. And Sansa's getting ready to do it to Littlefinger. So a great example of it. And so it could be a similar thing where it's like, it was a trap. In order to neutralize the threat of Azor Ahai, Nissa Nissa is sacrificing herself and sort of trapping him. There's that weirwood trap metaphor. And then there's the whole Night's Queen legend where she's taking his seed and soul, Night's King anyway, who I think is the same person as Azor Ahai, of course. And then and potentially using that to create the others as a weapon against his former folks. So there is definitely, I don't want to get too far into all that headcanon and theorizing, but depending on how it turns out with the truth of these ancient legends, we could see that this Nissa Nissa sacrifice was actually to trap the monster and to kill the monster, so to speak. Now, the even more interesting parallel, Tim, is the idea that Jon and Dany might have to become otherized in order to neutralize the threat of the others. There are different versions of this theory. My version of it would be like they're leading the others back into the weirwood net or something like that. The others seem to be looking for a leader, and Jon is kind of that person, seemingly. And there's definitely some Night's Queen symbolism with Dany, so again, not wanting to get into all those theories, but just if you've heard of those before, if Jon and Dany if one or both have to become otherized to lead the others home and not to the, land of the living, then that would be very similar to Ellen's sacrifice at the end of the story, where she's giving herself to the vampire in order to save everyone, kind of. So
Yeah. I believe that actually will come up when we get to Fever Dream, when I make the comparison to Joshua York and Jon Snow.
well, it's funny that you say that, because I think maybe we should stop here and do Fever Dream in a separate stream for two reasons. One, we haven't really touched it at all, and it's a big story. Two, it's the George Martin vampire story, and I think it's worth talking about in detail. And three, we might be able to get some more people to read this, because you could do, it's like a 16-hour audiobook. You can do it this week and be ready for whenever, to talk about it. So I'd like to do, I really am fired up to talk about Fever Dream, Tim. We're 2.5 hours into this stream, and my eyes are still burning for some reason. I don't know why. I just not having a good eye day. So what do you think about cutting this off and coming back to do Fever Dream on a different day?
Yeah, because I feel like if we go Fever Dream, we're gonna be here for hours on end again. There is a lot to say, because we are going to be relating back not just to Nosferatu and Dracula, but even more to A Song of Ice and Fire, because this is from George himself.
And I think a stream that's just titled Fever Dream, I think people will check it out. Now, I do want to warn people, when George says that it's like Mark Twain, meaning Huck Finn, meets Bram Stoker, there is the N-word. The N-word is in the book. Fair amount. There are racist characters who say the N-word. It is set in right before the Civil War. The slavery is an important part of the story, because there are all these parallels with vampires and slavery, vampires being enslaved to each other and enslaving people. And that's where some of George's quotes about abolition that we have quoted come from. Fire and Blood, referring to the need for abolition. And you can clearly see what George's view on all of it is. And the central character makes a kind of a journey on the idea of emancipation and all that stuff. But just to be warned, don't put the audiobook on with the kids in the car. Be ready for that. It burns the ear. It's not a word you really hear. So
it's mostly because it's sort of written in a POV from the perspective of Abner Marsh, who's our human protagonist, and then Sour Billy Tipton, who's our human antagonist. And it's the Billy Tipton chapters where the N-bomb gets dropped a lot.
Yeah, so don't have it on speakerphone at the restaurant. And if you don't want to hear that word even used, effectively in context, then don't. Let's let you know it's in there. Don't be surprised by it. So now I have to say it's a strange choice. I wouldn't probably have written a book, even if I was writing in that time period. I probably still wouldn't have used it. But George's whole thing is like, obviously not to censor the awfulness of humanity. He shows you these horrible characters and what they do, and doesn't round off the edges. So this is kind of like that. That's probably a fair disclaimer to give. But that being said, the story is really freaking good. And it does a lot of that trademark George stuff where you think somebody's going to do something successful, and then it pulls a chair out from under you. And you think the story is going to end, and then it takes all these further twists and turns. And it's just a lot of really good writing. There's a lot of good steamboat stuff. There's some great characters. There's lots of abolitionist themes and just interesting themes, period. And then, of course, there is George's vampires. So if you will check that out, then me and Tim... Okay, so first of all, Tim, 2 weeks from now is the Super Bowl. So 2 weeks from now, I'm going to do my stream on a Saturday instead of Sunday, because we do it right in the middle of like Super Bowl pregame and then the game. So maybe next Saturday to do this one.
Wait, so is that February 1st or February 8th?
That would be February 1st, I guess. The Super Bowl is on the 9th. And so that one's going to be on a Saturday. I'm kind of saying, since I'm going to do a Saturday stream in 2 weeks, maybe me and you could do a Saturday stream next week. I'll still do my Sunday stream probably. I don't know. I'll have to figure it out. But yeah, you know what? I can feel Maynard James Plum pulling his hair out right now. So let me just say, folks, that I will work this out with Tim. And then I will put out an announcement on the YouTube social media feed with a picture, a thumbnail of the Fever Dream stream, an announcement about when it's going to be. And what you should do is make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel and click on the little notification bell. Make sure it is set to all notifications. And then what happens is when you see the stream pop up in your feed, it'll say notify me. And you can click on that button, and then it will give you a phone beep when the stream is happening. But basically, yeah, I always Discord would be the other way, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And part of Fever Dream was also we were going to read the Lord Byron poem Darkness. So.
I want to read that poem very badly, and I want to do it in a dramatic voice, and I want to compare it to the Old Nan's Long Night story, because it's one of those ones where George took the rhyme, like the meter and the phrasing, and like used it. It's very cool.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But yeah, read Fever Dream again. Said maybe not blasted in public, not the Sour Billy chapters. Again, it is we talked about product this time. Fever Dream, George wrote it in 1982, so we're only a few years coming off the civil rights movement. We're in the Reagan years, so, you know, again, like, it's not going to have, like, today's norms about that type of thing, but it's still a very, very good story. If you enjoyed Bram Stoker's Dracula, and if you enjoy Mark Twain, George isn't lying when he says it really is Dracula meets Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah. And the Abner Marsh character really grows on you by the time the story is done. And also it'll be obvious to you, I think, but like this is the most insight into the true nature of Rhaegar that you will ever get. Joshua York is like Rhaegar on his little party gallivanting around to fulfill the prophecy with the utmost confidence and charm. It's very close to my Rhaegar. Like, it's very close to my reading Rhaegar. Just head in the clouds, delusions of grandeur all the way. Pay no mind to the consequences. It's pretty great. So think of that when you get Joshua York in the story. But a couple of super chats real quick, Tim. Instead of adding blood to himself as Bran does, Roose removes blood through leeching. Is this like an Antichrist perversion of blood magic? What do you think is the deal with the leeching?
Yeah, that's something. Because it's not him feeding on anyone; it's him allowing something to feed on him. And leeches have like their own vampire qualities to them. I'm sure if I were to take the time to look into the mythology and symbolism surrounding leeches, I'm sure there's something there.
It's probably just a shout out to the fact that in the Bram Stoker and the Nosferatu story, they're thinning her blood because they think she has too much blood, and so they're thinning her blood. So you probably just included that quack medical science because it's in the story.
That's true. Yeah, because in Bram's blood transfusions were like the new like big medical discovery. Keep in mind though, nobody had any idea how blood types worked, but still it was new. So you could think like for
George, interesting roulette wheel.
Yeah. So for Roose Bolton coming from his time, it's like in a medieval period. Oh yeah, leeching. It's the new craze. You got to get in on it. It's like how we would look at like lip injections and Botox. And
too
fillers
much blood.
Today.
That's the problem. Maybe he just chomps on him after he just sucks him in. It's like a loop. I don't know. Let's see. Kimberly says, I'm struck how in Nosferatu, Orlok tells Ellen he's her monster, which reminded her of Cold Hand's statement to Bran. Yeah, that's... So the Starks... I mentioned the Starks. What's interesting about the Starks is we think they're related to the others, and they're certainly tied to the Night's King mythology and stuff like that, and the Wall and all that. Like, we know they're potentially guilty of some stuff, but now they're sitting here trying to like babysit it and potentially make it better and fix it. So that's kind of an interesting thing. That's something we see more in Fever Dream as well. But it becomes a vampire hunter kind of a thing where it's like, in order to hunt the vampires, you have to study the occult, you know, and to defeat the vampire, you may have to tangle with him, you know. So George is into that, like, you've got to sink down into the gutter to fight the monster kind of a thing and dirty your hands. So we see that, I think, in some of these stories as well. And then somebody's mentioning Dungeons and Dragons has their own version of Dracula, Count Strahd, Von Richten, and the Romani.
Yeah, Strahd, of course, Strahd.
I don't know D&D, but
did you cover that one that's mentioned Kansas? There was one above that. I think we skipped. This was just after the Spanish flu pandemic.
I said that already.
Oh, you did? Oh, I just want to. Well, I want to comment on that because for a Fever Dream too. Because another thing that was going on in Kansas too was Bleeding Kansas. So Fever Dream starts off in 1857. Bleeding Kansas, which was this turmoil in Kansas between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces, that kicked off in 1854 and goes on to 1861. So it's in the general area that Abner Marsh is sailing out when he's like, our main points in Fever Dream are going to be St. Louis, Missouri, Natchez, Mississippi, and New Orleans, Louisiana, of course. But Abner does talk about like other places he's been to. Kansas does pop up. So yes, so not only is the Spanish flu going on, but so is the Bleeding Kansas when like abolitionists and we got like John Brown, and it's starting like the storm that will become the Civil War is starting. Like we're starting to see flare-ups and going on. And then Abner Marsh even comments on it. He's like, well, I'm no abolitionist, but he's not a slaver either. He's like trying to remain neutral, and the things that he's going through with Josh New York are gonna kind of like force his hand as the years go by.
Yeah, there's a lot of good parallelism in the story for sure. We'll have lots to talk about. Who in A Song of Ice and Fire would you cast Bill Skarsgård as? Roose. Well, I mean, probably Euron after watching that performance.
Either Euron or Roose. But Euron's the one who's doing more stuff, though.
Yeah, he would do either well, but he'd be more useful as Euron. Yeah, that was incredible. I want to see more of his work after watching that one. I haven't seen any of the other Eggers films, too, because I just haven't. I don't usually watch the horror movies, and I just hadn't seen The Norseman. But I'm going to go watch them now after seeing Nosferatu. Definitely a well-researched stream. Thanks for the awesome content. Have been recommended Fever Dream by other Discord members. We'll definitely read to prepare for the stream. There we go. See, this is what I was hoping for. We'll get more people on board that will know what we're talking about next week. So like I said, just grab the Audible book and listen to it on your travels and doing some chores, and 16 hours will go by pretty quick. I'm confident. Or if you like to read, you can do that. Now, real quick, let me just see if there's any Ice and Fire stuff that we didn't go through that I wanted to talk about. I think it's just Melisandre, and I didn't write this. Oh, the Targaryens. Okay, yes. Let's do this here at the end. So just look at them, Tim. Oh, let me put the chat back on. Just look at them. It's definitely a vibes thing with they're pale and kind of beautiful, but kind of disturbing. And some of them go more in that direction. But this is very much inspired by just the gothic feel of vampires. Targaryens and Valerians live exclusively in black castles, gothic black castles covered in gargoyles, okay? Their magic being rooted in blood and fire checks out with all the Dracula. It's all blood and fire. Valerian control of beasts, dragons, and then also, the human animal hybrid factory of Kagassos. I noticed, Tim, the dragons potentially could be killed by a weirwood arrow, according to Brandon Snow, maybe. And that would be, of course, a wooden stake through the heart of Dracula. That would be very close to that. Then we have, you like that? What do you think?
Yeah, it makes sense, again, because we talked about Dracula. Depending on how you want to translate it, it's either going to be devil or dragon. So a weirwood stake through a dragon heart, it plays on all the motifs.
If a weirwood arrow does it, then that'll be really exactly like that. We don't know. That's a theory. So the Valerians, this is really the big thing. The Valerians they drain the land around them of the living. So if you think about Valyria as Castle Dracula, it's the same thing. People go in, they don't come out. And it just keeps chewing up people, and everyone around it is afraid. No one can confront them, and people just try to stay away if they can. So all of Valyria was like a Castle Dracula. And then, of course, many Targaryens accused of blood sorcery of various types, and the worst of them are more vampire-like. For example, Maegor, all his different brides, kind of like a vampire chewing through women in like the Bram Stoker one, seeking out beautiful women and then killing them. That's what Maegor did.
Yeah. Also, Maegor's final three brides are known as his black brides, because they're all widows. But then in Dracula, Bram Stoker has his wives, his three brides, who, in the infamous scene, when he scolds them for attacking Jonathan Harker, he then gives them a baby to feed off of, showing like this is where Jonathan Harker like really sees like, oh, this is like, I was able to deal with all the weird stuff before, but now I can see you're absolute monsters. But then in the vein of Maegor, his wives, or at least some of his wives, are giving him monster baby. They're not feeding on babies, but they're giving him monster babies.
Absolutely. And so then we have Ares. He gets the long nails and hair. Okay, so more vampire-like, beastly. But then he's also chewing on Rhaella. There's like, she has bite marks on her, the poor thing. So that is very vampire-like. And then, like I said, Rhaegar is kind of like your cultured vampire, wearing black, but music and poetry, and then the Hades and Persephone, Lyanna stuff. So a lot of vampire influences on the Valyrians and Targaryens. That's all the stuff I spotted. And then, of course, there's a little bit that we're saving for the Fever Dream, because the main vampire in Fever Dream is Daemon Julian. So when you look at like Uber Targaryen being Daemon Targaryen, and also Daemon Blackfire, like the rebel Targaryen or whatever. These are meant as extra vampiric characters, if you will. And then the last thing I will say is Melisandre. Melisandre, there's a lot of vampiric elements. She reminds you a little bit of the three female vampires in Bram Stoker, especially when Van Helsing is trying to kill them and they are trying to bewitch him. And I guess also when they bewitch Jonathan. But it's similar to how people describe Melisandre, where she's beautiful but terrible and very unnerving. And of course, Melisandre has the exact same coloring as the vampire, being absolutely pale with this blood red lips. And Melisandre also is vampiric, trying to get children and other sacrifices to do blood magic in order to please her dark god. So yeah, very vampiric. And then also the other thing, Tim, I noticed the way that she is trying to get Jon Snow to embrace his power is very similar to the way that Nosferatu, Orlok, is trying to get Ellen to embrace her power, and saying, you're not of this world, you have this power, you need to embrace it. It's kind of very similar to Melisandre's speech to Jon.
Yeah. And then I also made a connection to Melisandre to another aspect of Nosferatu, and this is from the Willem Dafoe movie, where Shadow of the Vampire, where he's a vampire playing an actor. But so it's when Melisandre, in her one POV chapter in Dance, when she's talking about how she doesn't need to eat anymore, like the fire of R'hllor is enough to nutrition for her. But then she has to remind herself, like, yeah, I have, like, when that squire comes and asks her, my lady, would you like some breakfast? And she's like, oh
yeah, breakfast. I love breakfast all the time. Yeah, definitely.
Remind herself, like, oh yeah, I should eat because people are going to be weirded out if I don't eat. There's a scene in Shadow of the Vampire. Willem Dafoe's character is talking with the crew, and they ask him, like, did you read Dracula? And he said, yeah, the director made me read it. And they're like, well, what'd you think? And Willem Dafoe goes into this, he starts waxing poetic about Dracula's loss of humanity. He says, like, he thinks the saddest scene is thinking that Dracula having to prepare a meal for Jonathan Harker because he has to play the role. He has to make Jonathan Harker. He has to make sure, like, you know, Jonathan Harker doesn't catch on. So it's like, it's him. He's thinking about, like, this is something he hasn't had to do for centuries. He hasn't had to eat food yet. Here he is. He has to make this meal. He has to use these senses he hasn't used in centuries, like smell and taste, all the things that we would use when we're cooking, all for a meal that he can't enjoy solely for part of the scam, to play the game, to make him seem like he's human when he's not. And I felt like, I'm like, that's exactly like Melisandre's thoughts. It's like, this is a game. But I can't let people on, so I have to play a role of being human, because if people catch on to this otherworldly nature I have, they're gonna freak out.
And this is exactly what's happening with Melisandre, or with Jonathan Harker, rather, when he's hanging out in the first, like, couple of days before he's seen all the super horrible shit. He's like, oh, I don't really think I've seen him eat anything.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like,
he never sups with me. He's gone all day. It's like, and that's why is that, like, my one problem with Jonathan Harker is like, I get it. It's for the story, but it's like, man, you're kind of slow on the uptake.
He's just a committed salesman, Tim.
Yeah.
He's committed to the job, but
that commission is worth so much.
But my main point is just that when we talk about inspiration, like, inspiration is an emotional thing. It comes from George reading a story and going, oh man, I got to do something like that. This makes me want to write. So the presence of the vampire is the same as the presence of Melisandre. Like, she is trying to pass as normal, but if you look a little closer, you're like, some of this doesn't add up. Mm-hmm. So it's very like that. And then the other thing is that Melisandre may be, of course, very, very old. She may be corpse-like underneath of her illusion. And so the vampires, depending on which version you have, are sometimes corpse-like, or sometimes they can hide their great age under a false beauty. So,
yeah, and that is something else. Shadow the Vampire. He talks about the poem Tithonus, which I did a reading on my channel. Tithonus is a Trojan prince who falls in love with Eos, the goddess of the dawn. Eos loves him back, and she asks Zeus for a boon to give Tithonus eternal life. But Zeus is a prick, and he does like a whole monkey's paw aspect where he's like, okay, and he grants Tithonus eternal life, but he doesn't give him eternal youth. So Tithonus is cursed to live forever, constantly aging. And so when we get to the point in the poem, Tithonus is so aged that he can't even lift his arms up anymore. He's just like, just let me die, praying for a death that will never come. And that's like makes you think like Melisandre might be a lot old. What's hiding underneath Melisandre's glamour? We
don't know. I'm very curious to find out. I suspect something burnt, but we shall see. We shall see. And then the last thing which people in the chat are mentioning is obviously Harrenhal. It's the big black castle. Me and Tim have done a big, long Harrenhal stream recounting all the horror and celebrating all the witches. So we're not going to go through all that. But yes, Danelle Lawston, always associated with bats and drinking blood and stuff like that. And this sort of there comes to a crescendo in the third book, I believe it is, when there's rumors going around about how Sansa fled King's Landing, which was that she turned into a wolf with bat wings and flew out of a tower after killing some people or something like that. So this is sort of the wolf symbolism and the Dracula Batwing symbolism, it's sort of inherited through Lawston and went into Tully and into Sansa. She seems to be picking it up, and she's got the red hair and stuff. So that's not. I don't know that there's a lot to say about that. There's a lot of vampirism going on in Sansa's plot. Maybe there's obviously Peter being a predator and stuff, but. That scene obviously is an ode to it. And then with Harrenhal, I think with Harrenhal really snaps into place when Daemon comes there. You know, as we talked about, Daemon being the name for the vampire in Fever Dream. And so when he comes to the castle and starts carving up the weirwood, there's a lot of symbolism going on. And yeah.
Yeah, we do. So I would say go for those who haven't checked that one out. Go check out the Harrenhal stream. We do touch upon the vampire aspects when we get to House of Lothston, and then on my channel, got to tout my own videos. I did do a full video history of House of Lothston where I go through their rise and fall, and of course the Mad Donnell section will be talks about the vampire aspect, Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, and the effect that has had on her character, as well as Shara Seastar too is another Blood Countess figure. Egg tells us that she bathes in the blood of young women, and that's how she retains her beauty and all that.
So Tim, just real quick to go back to the follow-up live stream for this, the reason why I was suggesting a Saturday is because you work during the week, correct?
Yeah, and I'm definitely not available next Sunday is my nephew Merrick's first birthday, so I'll be attending that. But Saturdays I will. And you said the following Sunday is the Super Bowl.
Right. So you are potentially available next Saturday?
Yeah, either the 1st or the 8th, I can do both of those Saturdays.
So stay in touch, guys, but definitely look out for a Saturday stream. 2 weeks from now, I will definitely be streaming on Saturday. I am not sure who the guests will be or what the topic is, but I'm not going on Super Bowl Sunday. I'm going the day before Super Bowl Sunday. And with Tim, I'd like to do this Fever Dream one as soon as possible since we've got it fresh. So ideally, I would like to do it next Saturday if that works out.
Yeah, this upcoming Saturday, February 1st, put a pin in that for the Fever Dream stream.
So I guess what I don't know is if I'll also do a Sunday stream too. I probably will because I wouldn't want to let anyone down who is looking for one. So I'll probably end up doing a back-to-back, it sounds like. But yeah, like I said, subscribe to the channel, and I will post about it in the next day or two on the regular feed, and then I'll post the stream itself. So you have 2 different warnings in your feed about whatever's going on. So in the meantime, check out Fever Dream, and then we'll have a lot of fun talking about it together, book club style, I guess. So there you go.
Yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about.
Lots to talk about. Yeah, I don't want to shortchange it. So this has been a perfectly paced discussion. I like how we went and we covered, all this stuff in this one. And so I think we'll have a little shorter but thorough Fever Dream stream, and then I'll be satisfied with our coverage of vampires. Really, we need to wait for Euron to do more stuff, and then we'll have more to talk about with him.
Yeah.
So
this one took us out of our wheelhouse a lot because we're not centering solely on A Song of Ice and Fire. Got to bust out those chops of we know stuff about things.
Well, this is really the only way to appreciate what George, because George has really a deeper understanding and appreciation for this stuff, certainly than I do. He lived through, some of these movies and just the permutation. He's been thinking about this story for 40 years, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah. All right, guys. Well, and go see Nosferatu while it's still in the theater if you haven't. That's the other thing I'll recommend. So subscribe to Greyways Tim, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys soon with more content. And watch Naga's Bones if you haven't, because I put that out a couple days ago.
It's a good one.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Cheers, guys.